She only wanted to make her ex jealous. But the man she kissed has a secret that could change her entire life. You won't believe who he really is. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The autumn wind swept through the village of Thornwick with a bitter chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of its inhabitants. The small settlement, nestled in the rolling hills of northern England, had seen better days, though its people remained resilient despite the hardships that plagued their daily lives. Thatched roofs crowned the modest stone cottages that lined the muddy pathways, and smoke rose from chimneys in thin gray columns, carrying the scent of burning wood and hearth-cooked meals into the crisp air. Isabeau Thorne stood at the edge of the village square, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she watched the gathered crowd with barely concealed frustration. Her long chestnut hair, usually braided neatly down her back, had come slightly loose from its binding, and a few rebellious strands whipped across her face in the wind. She was a woman of remarkable beauty, with high cheekbones, full lips that seemed made for both laughter and defiance, and eyes the color of forest moss that sparkled with intelligence and spirit. Her dress, though simple, and made of rough-spun wool dyed a deep burgundy, fit her slender frame in a way that emphasized her graceful figure. Over it, she wore a well-worn leather vest laced at the front, and a thick woolen cloak lined with rabbit fur hung from her shoulders, fastened with a simple iron brooch. At 23 summers, Isabeau had become something of a fixture in Thornwick's social landscape, known equally for her skill with medicinal herbs, her sharp tongue, and her recent heartbreak. The latter was entirely the fault of Edmund Blackwood, the blacksmith's son, who stood not 20 paces away, his arm wrapped possessively around the waist of Margaret Fletcher, the miller's daughter. The sight made Isabeau's stomach turn, not from jealousy, or so she told herself, but from the sheer audacity of it all. It had been merely 3 weeks since Edmund had proclaimed his undying devotion to Isabeau beneath the old oak tree at the village's eastern border. 3 weeks since he had kissed her with what she had believed was genuine passion. 3 weeks since he had whispered promises of a future together, of a home they would build, of children they would raise. And now, here he stood, parading his new affection before the entire village as if Isabeau had meant nothing at all. "He's not worth the anger you're feeding, Belle," came a soft voice beside her. Isabeau turned to see her closest friend, Marjorie, a plump woman with kind eyes and a perpetual smile that somehow managed to weather every storm life threw at her. Marjorie worked alongside Isabeau, gathering herbs from the forest and helping her prepare remedies for the village's various ailments. "I'm not angry," Isabeau lied, her jaw tight. "I simply find it remarkable how quickly a man can forget his own words." Marjorie snorted, a sound that was both unladylike and utterly endearing. Men forget their words the moment something prettier catches their eye. Edmund Blackwood is no different from any other fool with more muscle than sense. Isabeau knew Marjorie spoke the truth, yet the sting of betrayal remained fresh. It wasn't just that Edmund had moved on so quickly. It was that he had chosen to do so publicly, deliberately, as if to prove some point about his own desirability. She had seen him glancing her way repeatedly throughout the morning, checking to see if she was watching, if she was affected. The realization that he sought to wound her pride made her blood boil. The village square had filled considerably since dawn. Today marked the Autumn Harvest Festival, a tradition that brought together everyone from the surrounding farmsteads to celebrate the season's bounty and give thanks for the food that would sustain them through the coming winter. Long tables had been set up, laden with bread, cheese, roasted meats, and barrels of ale. Children ran between the adults' legs, their laughter bright against the gray sky. Musicians tuned their instruments near the central well, preparing for the dancing that would begin once the sun reached its zenith. Isabeau had been looking forward to this day for weeks, had even prepared a special salve as a gift for old Thomas the shepherd, whose joints pained him terribly in cold weather. But now the joy had been leached from the occasion by Edmund's petty display. She watched as he leaned down to whisper something in Margaret's ear, making the girl giggle and blush. The performance was so obvious, so calculated, that Isabeau felt her hands curl into fists beneath her cloak. "I should go," she muttered to Marjorie. "I have herbs to dry, and this spectacle holds no interest for me." "Don't you dare," Marjorie said firmly, grabbing Isabeau's arm. "If you leave now, he wins. He wants you to run away with your tail between your legs. Don't give him the satisfaction." Isabeau opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, a commotion arose at the far end of the square. The crowd began to part, murmurs of surprise and curiosity rippling through the gathered villagers. Isabeau craned her neck to see what had caused the disturbance, her curiosity overriding her desire to flee. A group of horsemen had entered the village, and they were unlike any travelers Thornwick typically saw. There were 5 of them, all mounted on magnificent destriers whose coats gleamed even in the pale autumn light. The horses alone would have been remarkable enough. Such animals were worth more than most villagers would earn in a lifetime, but it was the riders themselves who commanded attention. They were warriors. That much was clear from the way they sat their mounts and the weapons they carried. Each man wore a long cloak of thick wool lined with fur, and beneath these cloaks, Isabeau could glimpse leather armor reinforced with metal studs. Their clothing was of fine quality, far superior to anything worn in Thornwick, with intricate embroidery along the hems and collars. But it was the man who rode at the front of the group who drew every eye and held every gaze. He was tall, powerfully built, with broad shoulders that spoke of years spent training with sword and shield. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, falling to his shoulders in thick waves that the wind caught and tossed about. Even from a distance, Isabeau could see the strong line of his jaw, covered with several days' worth of dark stubble that only enhanced his rugged appearance. His eyes, she couldn't quite make out their color from where she stood, scanned the village with an intensity that made her shiver. He wore a cloak of deep crimson lined with black fur, clasped at his shoulder with a brooch that caught the light with a telltale gleam of gold. Beneath the cloak he wore a tunic of dark leather tooled with intricate patterns, and a thick belt cinched his narrow waist from which hung a sword whose pommel was wrapped in worn leather. The stranger's face was striking in its masculine beauty, sharp features that looked as if they had been carved from stone, a straight nose and lips that were full but pressed into a firm line. There was something about him that commanded respect, even from those who had never seen him before. He carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to authority, yet there was also a weariness in his eyes, as if he had seen too much of the world's darkness. "Who are they?" Marjorie whispered, her earlier concern about Edmund completely forgotten. "I don't know," Isabeau replied, unable to look away from the lead rider. "But they're no common travelers." The horseman came to a halt near the center of the square, and the dark-haired man dismounted with fluid grace despite his size. He was even more imposing on foot, standing easily a head taller than most of the village men. The crowd had fallen silent, watching these strangers with a mixture of awe and apprehension. It was rare for anyone of obvious wealth and status to pass through Thornwick, which lay well off the main roads that connected the larger towns and cities. The village elder, a wizened man named Aldrich, whose bent back spoke of his many years, stepped forward with the aid of his walking stick. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice reedy but carrying well in the sudden quiet. "We are honored by your presence in our humble village. How may we be of service to you and your men?" The dark-haired stranger regarded Aldrich with eyes that Isabeau could now see were a striking shade of gray-blue, like the sea before a storm. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, with an accent that marked him as educated and well-traveled. "We seek only rest and perhaps a meal before continuing our journey. We have been riding since dawn, and our horses require water and feed." Of course," Aldrich said, bobbing his head eagerly. "You've arrived on a fortuitous day, my lord. We are celebrating our harvest festival. There is food and drink aplenty, and you and your men are most welcome to partake." The stranger inclined his head in acknowledgement. "You are generous. We accept your hospitality." As the other riders dismounted, stable boys from the village rushed forward to take the horses' reins, their eyes wide with wonder at the magnificent beasts. The strangers moved through the crowd with easy confidence, and the villagers parted before them like water before the prow of a ship. Isabeau found herself studying the dark-haired man with fascination. There was something about him that set him apart from his companions, though she couldn't quite identify what it was. Perhaps it was the way the other men deferred to him subtly, or the way his eyes constantly assessed everything around him, missing nothing. She was so absorbed in her observation that she didn't notice Edmund approaching until he was nearly upon her. He had finally abandoned Margaret's side, and now he sauntered toward Isabeau with that self-satisfied smirk that she had once found charming and now recognized as insufferable arrogance. "Well, Isabeau," he said loudly enough that several nearby villagers turned to listen, "I see you've decided to grace us with your presence after all. I wasn't sure you'd have the courage to show your face after—" After you revealed yourself to be a faithless swine? Isabeau interrupted, her voice sweet as honey laced with poison. Oh, Edmund, I wouldn't miss this festival for the world. I'm quite enjoying myself, actually. Edmund's smirk faltered slightly, but he pressed on. I'm glad to hear it. I was worried you might be pining away in that little cottage of yours, crying into your herbs and potions. Marjorie made a sound of outrage beside Isabeau, but Isabeau herself remained calm, though her heart hammered in her chest. She refused to give Edmund the satisfaction of seeing her upset. Before she could formulate a cutting response, however, she felt the weight of someone's gaze upon her. She glanced to the side and found herself locked in eye contact with the dark-haired stranger. He stood perhaps 10 paces away, a wooden cup of ale in one hand, and he was watching the exchange between her and Edmund with undisguised interest. Their eyes met, and Isabeau felt a jolt of something electric pass through her. His expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch in her throat. For a moment, the noise of the festival seemed to fade away, and there was only the stranger and the peculiar connection that sparked between them. An idea formed in Isabeau's mind, reckless and impulsive and utterly unlike her usual careful nature. But Edmund's words had stung, and the stranger's attention had given her an opportunity she couldn't resist. Without allowing herself time to reconsider, she turned back to Edmund with a brilliant smile. "Pining for you?" she said, her voice carrying clearly. "Oh, Edmund, you flatter yourself. I've been far too occupied to spare you a single thought." And with that, she turned on her heel and walked directly toward the dark-haired stranger. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain everyone could hear it, but she forced herself to maintain her confident stride. The stranger watched her approach with raised eyebrows, curiosity evident in his expression. When she reached him, she didn't pause to introduce herself or explain. Instead, driven by a mixture of wounded pride and defiant impulse, she reached up, placed her hands on his broad shoulders, pulled herself up onto her toes, and pressed her lips firmly against his. The stranger's lips were warm against hers, and for a heartbeat, Isabeau felt him go completely still with surprise. She had never done anything so bold, so utterly scandalous in her entire life, and for a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. What had she been thinking? This man was a complete stranger, a nobleman by the look of him, and she had just accosted him in front of the entire village like some common tavern wench. Heat flooded her cheeks, and she was about to pull away when she felt his hand come up to rest gently at the small of her back. The touch was light, almost questioning, but it steadied her, and then, to her utter shock, he kissed her back. It was not a passionate embrace, but neither did he push her away or respond with anger. Instead, his lips moved against hers with a strange sort of bemused curiosity, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. The kiss lasted only a few seconds longer before Isabeau stepped back, her heart racing like a frightened bird in her chest. The village square had fallen into absolute silence. Every eye was fixed upon them, mouths agape in shock. Isabeau could see Marjorie's expression of pure disbelief, old Aldrich's scandalized face, and most satisfyingly, Edmund's look of stunned outrage. Margaret clung to his arm, her pretty face twisted with confusion and indignation. The stranger looked down at Isabeau with those storm-colored eyes, and she saw amusement dancing in their depths along with something else she couldn't quite identify. One dark eyebrow arched questioningly, and the corner of his mouth quirked up in the ghost of a smile. He was even more handsome up close, she realized with a flutter of nervousness. His face was all strong angles and masculine beauty, marred only by a thin scar that ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, a mark that somehow made him more compelling rather than less. "Well," he said softly, his deep voice pitched for her ears alone. That was unexpected. Isabeau felt her courage wavering. What had she done? She opened her mouth to apologize, to explain, to say something that might salvage this impossible situation, but before she could speak, Edmund's voice rang out across the square. "You shameless harlot," he shouted, his face flushed dark red with anger. "Have you lost all sense of decency, throwing yourself at strangers like a—" "That's enough." The stranger's voice cut through Edmund's tirade like a blade through silk. He didn't raise his volume, but there was such authority in his tone that Edmund's mouth snapped shut immediately. The stranger turned his full attention to the blacksmith's son, and Isabeau saw Edmund actually take a step backward under the weight of that gaze. "I suggest you choose your next words very carefully, friend," The lady has done nothing to warrant such disrespect. Lady, Edmund sputtered, finding his voice again, though it had lost much of its confidence. She's no lady. She's just a village healer who is standing right here and can speak for herself, Isabeau interrupted, finding her own voice at last. She was trembling slightly, but whether from fear, embarrassment, or exhilaration, she couldn't say. She forced herself to meet Edmund's eyes steadily. And I'll thank you not to speak of me as if I'm not present, Edmund Blackwood. You gave up any right to concern yourself with my actions when you decided to pursue Margaret 3 days after professing your love to me. A murmur ran through the crowd. It seemed that not everyone had been aware of the precise timing of Edmund's fickleness, and several villagers now regarded him with disapproval. Margaret's eyes widened, and she looked between Edmund and Isabeau with dawning comprehension and anger. 3 days? Margaret said, her voice rising shrilly. You told me you'd been pining for me for months. You said Isabeau meant nothing to you. Edmund's face went from red to purple. That's not... I didn't... She's twisting things. The stranger watched this domestic drama unfold with what appeared to be mild entertainment. His hand had not left Isabeau's back, and she found his presence oddly comforting despite the chaos she had unleashed. She became aware that his companions had drawn closer, forming a loose semicircle behind him. They were all watching with varying degrees of amusement and interest. Perhaps, said one of the other men, a sandy-haired warrior with laugh lines around his eyes, we should allow the lady to explain why she chose to bestow such an enthusiastic greeting upon our companion here. I confess I'm quite curious about the story behind it. Isabeau felt her face burn even hotter. What could she possibly say? That she had kissed a complete stranger purely to make her faithless former lover jealous? That she had acted on impulse without thought to the consequences? Before she could attempt an explanation, the dark-haired stranger spoke again. I believe, he said smoothly, that the lady and I are old friends who simply haven't seen each other in some time. Isn't that right? He looked down at Isabeau, and she saw the challenge in his eyes. He was offering her a way out, a convenient fiction that would spare her reputation. All she had to do was agree. But Isabeau had never been particularly good at lying, and she found that even now, with her pride on the line and the entire village watching, she couldn't bring herself to accept the easy escape he offered. She lifted her chin and met his gaze squarely. No, she said clearly. That's not right at all. The truth is, my lord, I kissed you because I wanted to prove a point to that insufferable fool over there. She gestured toward Edmund without looking at him. It was rash and impulsive, and probably the most foolish thing I've ever done, and I apologize for using you in such a manner. You didn't deserve to be dragged into my petty drama. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Isabeau could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She had just admitted to her shameful behavior in front of everyone, had confessed to using this nobleman for her own purposes. She waited for his anger, for his disgust, for him to turn away from her with contempt. Instead, he threw back his head and laughed. It was a rich, genuine sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest, and it transformed his entire face. The weariness that had shadowed his eyes lifted. The stern line of his mouth curved into a broad smile, and for a moment he looked younger, almost boyish. His companion stared at him in apparent shock, as if this display of mirth was something rare and unexpected. My lady, he said when his laughter subsided, his eyes still dancing with amusement, I have been called many things in my life, but never before have I been used as a tool for revenge against a spurned lover. I find I'm not at all offended. In fact, I'm rather impressed by your audacity. He glanced at Edmund with undisguised disdain. And I must say, if that is what you gave up for the miller's daughter, you're an even greater fool than you appear. Edmund's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, but no sound came out. Margaret had released his arm and was glaring at him with fury. The crowd was beginning to murmur again, some with disapproval, others with barely suppressed laughter. Isabeau felt something loosen in her chest. He wasn't angry. He was laughing. She found herself smiling despite her embarrassment, relief flooding through her. You're very kind to take it so well, my lord. Most men would be furious at such treatment. Most men, said the sandy-haired companion with a grin, haven't been kissed by beautiful women in village squares. Our friend here should count himself fortunate, regardless of the circumstances. The stranger shot his companion a quelling look, but there was no real heat in it. He turned his attention back to Isabeau, and she found herself unable to look away from his intense gaze. Up close, she could see flecks of darker blue in his gray eyes, like storm clouds gathering over the sea. "Tell me," he said, "does this village have an inn where my men and I might find lodging for the night? The festival is pleasant, but we've been traveling for days, and a proper bed would be most welcome." Isabeau seized on the change of subject gratefully. "We have no inn, I'm afraid. Thornwick is too small for such establishments. But old Aldrich there," she gestured toward the village elder, who was still watching the scene with wide eyes. "He might be able to arrange lodging with some of the local families. We're simple folk, but we're not inhospitable." The stranger nodded thoughtfully. "And what of you, my lady? Where do you dwell?" The question caught Isabeau off guard. I have a cottage at the edge of the village near the forest. I live alone and tend to the herbs and medicinal plants." "Why do you ask?" "Merely curious," he said, but there was something in his tone that suggested more than idle interest. "A healer, then? That's a valuable skill." "It's an honest living," Isabeau replied, defensive despite herself. "I help where I can. The village has no proper physician, so someone must know how to set bones and treat fevers." "I meant no disrespect," the stranger said quickly. "On the contrary, I have great respect for healers. I've seen enough battlefields to know the value of skilled hands and knowledge of herbs." The mention of battlefields sent a chill through Isabeau. Of course, the way he carried himself, the sword at his hip, the deference his companions showed him. This was a warrior, a man who had seen violence and death. She found herself wondering what battles he had fought, what enemies he had faced, what scars he carried beneath his fine clothing. Marjorie appeared at Isabeau's elbow, having finally recovered from her shock enough to move. "Belle," she hissed urgently, "what in heaven's name has gotten into you? Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "Made a complete fool of myself?" Isabeau suggested wryly. "Yes, I'm quite aware." "That's putting it mildly," Marjorie said, though her eyes kept darting to the stranger with undisguised curiosity. "The whole village will be talking about this for months, and Edmund looks like he wants to challenge this man to single combat." Isabeau glanced over at Edmund, who indeed appeared to be struggling with some violent internal conflict. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and he was staring at the stranger with barely contained fury. Margaret had moved away from him and was now whispering furiously with a group of other young women, all of whom kept shooting venomous looks in Isabeau's direction. "Let him try," the sandy-haired companion said cheerfully, having overheard Marjorie's comment. "It would be the shortest fight in history." "There will be no fighting," the dark-haired stranger said firmly. "We are guests in this village, and we will not repay their hospitality with violence." He looked directly at Edmund. "Unless, of course, the lady requires protection from unwanted attention. In that case, I would be more than happy to provide it." The threat, though delivered in a mild tone, was unmistakable. Edmund paled and took another step back. Whatever anger he felt, it was clearly outweighed by his sense of self-preservation. The stranger was not just taller and more powerfully built. There was something about him that promised swift and decisive action if provoked. "I require no such protection," Isabeau said quickly, though part of her thrilled at the idea of this imposing warrior defending her honor. "Edmund is harmless, just foolish and vain." "As you say," the stranger replied, but his eyes remained on Edmund for a moment longer before returning to Isabeau. "Still, should you change your mind, you need only ask." Aldrich chose that moment to bustle forward, clearly eager to restore some semblance of normalcy to the proceedings. "My lord, if you and your men would care to sample our humble fare, we would be honored, and I will personally see to arranging comfortable lodgings for you all." The stranger inclined his head graciously. "That would be most welcome, elder. You have my thanks." He glanced down at Isabeau, and she saw something shift in his expression, a softness that hadn't been there before. "And perhaps the lady healer would consent to dine with us. I find myself curious to know more about the woman bold enough to kiss a stranger in front of an entire village." Isabeau's heart skipped a beat. Was he asking her to join them? Part of her wanted to refuse, to retreat to her cottage and hide from the spectacle she had created. But another part, the same reckless part that had driven her to kiss him in the first place, whispered that this might be the most interesting thing to happen to her in years. Yes, she heard herself say. "I would be honored, my lord." His smile was slow and devastatingly attractive. "Excellent. And please call me Hadrian. We've already shared a kiss after all." It seems foolish to stand on formality now. Hadrian. The name suited him, Isabeau thought. It was strong and uncommon, much like the man himself. She found herself returning his smile despite her lingering embarrassment. "Then you must call me Isabeau," she said, "though I fear you already have quite an unfair advantage in knowing my most impulsive and foolish side." "On the contrary," Hadrian said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate tone again, "I find your honesty refreshing. Most people I encounter are far too concerned with appearances and propriety. Your willingness to speak the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is admirable." Marjorie made a small sound beside Isabeau that might have been a stifled laugh or a gasp of disbelief. Isabeau herself felt heat rising in her cheeks again, but this time it wasn't entirely from embarrassment. There was something in the way Hadrian looked at her, something in his words, that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with shame or anger. The festival began to resume around them, as the initial shock wore off and people returned to their celebrations. The musicians struck up a lively tune, and some of the younger villagers began to dance. Tables groaned under the weight of food and drink, and the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread filled the air. But Isabeau was only dimly aware of it all. Her attention remained fixed on Hadrian and the strange, unexpected turn her day had taken. As they moved toward the tables, she found herself walking beside him, very conscious of his presence. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at his face, and his broad shoulders seemed to block out half the sky. His companions fell into step around them, and she heard them talking amongst themselves in low voices, occasionally glancing at her with curiosity. "You must forgive my men," Hadrian said quietly. "They're not accustomed to seeing me kissed by strangers. In fact, they're probably not accustomed to seeing me smile at all. You've given them something to talk about for weeks." "I've given the entire village something to talk about for weeks," Isabeau replied ruefully. "I'll probably never live this down. Does that trouble you?" Isabeau considered the question. A few hours ago she would have said yes without hesitation. Her reputation mattered to her, and she had always been careful to maintain the respect of her neighbors. But now, with Edmund's betrayal still fresh and this mysterious stranger looking at her with such open interest, she found that she cared less than she would have expected. "No," she said slowly. "Not as much as it should, perhaps. Edmund has already damaged my reputation by flaunting his new attachment so publicly. At least this way, I've shown that I won't simply accept humiliation quietly." "A warrior's spirit," Hadrian observed. "You fight back when attacked rather than cowering. That's good. The world needs more people willing to stand their ground." They reached the tables, and Hadrian's companions began helping themselves to food and ale with the enthusiasm of men who had been traveling rough. Hadrian himself remained standing, his attention still focused on Isabeau. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "How does a woman come to be a healer in a village like this? It's not common for such knowledge to be held by one so young." Isabeau accepted a cup of ale from one of the serving women, grateful for something to do with her hands. "My grandmother was the village healer before me. She taught me everything she knew, which plants could cure and which could kill, how to set broken bones, how to deliver babies. When she died 3 years ago, I took over her work. Someone had to, and I was the only one with the knowledge." "Your parents?" Hadrian asked, his tone gentle. "Gone," Isabeau said simply. "My father died when I was 12, my mother a year later. My grandmother raised me after that. She was a formidable woman, sharp as a tack until the day she died. She always said that knowledge was the only real power a woman could have in this world, and she made sure I had plenty of it." Hadrian's expression softened at her words, and Isabeau saw something flicker in his eyes, understanding perhaps, or recognition of shared loss. "A wise woman, your grandmother, and she was right about knowledge being power. I've seen kingdoms rise and fall on the strength of what men know and what they choose to do with that knowledge." They found seats at one of the long tables, and Isabeau was acutely aware of the curious stares directed their way. Edmund had retreated to the far side of the square with Margaret, though he continued to shoot dark glances in their direction. Marjorie had positioned herself nearby, clearly determined not to miss a moment of this unprecedented situation. The sandy-haired companion who had spoken earlier settled himself across from them with a loaded plate and a grin. "I'm Sir Brennan, by the way," he said to Isabeau. "Since our stoic friend here seems to have forgotten his manners in all the excitement. These other rogues are Sir Philip, Sir Thomas, And the young one trying not to stare at you is Garrett, Hadrian's squire. Isabeau nodded to each of them in turn. Sir Philip was older, perhaps in his 40th year, with gray threading through his dark hair and the weathered look of a man who had spent his life outdoors. Sir Thomas was younger, closer to Hadrian's age, with auburn hair and a serious demeanor, and Garrett, the squire, was indeed staring at her with wide-eyed fascination until Sir Thomas elbowed him sharply in the ribs. "A pleasure to meet you all," Isabeau said, trying to ignore the surreal quality of dining with armed knights in her village square. "Though I confess I'm still somewhat bewildered by this entire situation." "That makes two of us," Hadrian said with wry amusement. "When I woke this morning, I certainly didn't anticipate being kissed by a beautiful healer as part of an elaborate revenge scheme." "It wasn't that elaborate," Isabeau protested. "It was actually quite simple and incredibly stupid." "But effective," Sir Brennan pointed out. "The blacksmith's son looked like he'd been struck by lightning. I thought his eyes might actually pop from his skull." Despite her embarrassment, Isabeau couldn't help but laugh. "Yes, well, I may have achieved my immediate goal, but I fear I've created far more problems than I've solved. The village goodwives will have a field day with this. By tomorrow they'll be saying I've lost my mind entirely." "Let them talk," Hadrian said firmly. "You owe them nothing, least of all explanations for your private affairs." There was something in his tone that suggested he spoke from experience, and Isabeau found herself wondering again about this man, who commanded such obvious authority, yet traveled with only a small group of companions. Most nobles she had encountered, admittedly few, traveled with much larger retinues, eager to display their wealth and status. Hadrian and his men traveled light, like soldiers on a mission rather than lords on a leisurely journey. "Where are you bound, if I may ask?" Isabeau ventured. "Thornwick is rather out of the way for most travelers." A flicker of something, caution perhaps, crossed Hadrian's face before his expression smoothed into neutrality. "North," he said simply. "We have business in the borderlands that requires our attention." It was clearly all he intended to say on the subject, and Isabeau sensed that pressing further would be unwelcome. She nodded and turned her attention to her food, though she could feel Hadrian's gaze on her even as she ate. The afternoon wore on, and the festival continued around them. Music played, children danced, and ale flowed freely. Isabeau found herself relaxing into the conversation, drawn in by Hadrian's quiet charm and the easy camaraderie of his companions. Sir Brennan regaled them with increasingly outrageous tales of their travels, each story more embellished than the last, while Sir Philip offered dry commentary that had even the serious Sir Thomas chuckling. Through it all, Hadrian remained attentive to Isabeau, asking her questions about her work, her life, her thoughts on everything from the best remedies for winter agues to her opinions on the king's recent policies regarding land taxation. It had been so long since anyone had genuinely listened to her, had treated her thoughts and opinions as valuable, that Isabeau found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. "You're well informed for a village healer," Hadrian observed at one point. "Most people in rural areas know little of court politics or royal decrees." Isabeau shrugged, breaking off a piece of bread. "My grandmother believed that knowledge of all kinds was important. She taught me to read, and the village priest sometimes shares his news sheets with me. I may live in a small village, but that doesn't mean I want to remain ignorant of the wider world." "And what do you think of that wider world?" Hadrian asked, his gray-blue eyes intent on her face. Isabeau considered her words carefully. "I think it's complicated and often unjust. I think the powerful make decisions that affect the powerless without considering the consequences. I think—" She hesitated, wondering if she dared speak so frankly. "I think those who rule often forget that their subjects are real people with real lives, not just numbers in a tax ledger or bodies to throw at their enemies in war." Silence fell around the table. Sir Brennan had stopped mid-story, and even young Garrett was staring at her with something like shock. Isabeau felt her stomach drop. Had she gone too far? She had just criticized the nobility to a group of noblemen. What had she been thinking? But Hadrian was nodding slowly, his expression thoughtful rather than offended. "You're not wrong," he said quietly. "Those in power often do lose sight of the individual lives affected by their choices. It's easier to see people as abstractions, as problems to be solved or resources to be managed, than to acknowledge their humanity." "You speak as if you know something of governance yourself, my lord," Isabeau said carefully. Hadrian's lips quirked in a humorless smile. I know enough to understand that ruling well is far more difficult than most people imagine. Every decision carries consequences, often unforeseen. The challenge is to remember the weight of those consequences, to never forget that behind every decree, every tax, every call to arms, there are real people whose lives hang in the balance. There was something in his voice, a heaviness that spoke of personal experience with such weighty decisions. Isabeau studied him more closely, noting details she had overlooked before. The quality of his clothing was exceptional, far beyond what even a wealthy knight might wear. The gold brooch that held his cloak was worked with intricate designs that suggested royal craftsmanship, and the way his men deferred to him wasn't just the respect soldiers showed a commander, it was something deeper, more ingrained. A suspicion began to form in her mind, so outlandish that she almost dismissed it immediately. But the pieces fit too well. The fine clothes, the obvious authority, the careful way he avoided speaking about his identity or destination, the fact that he traveled with only a small guard rather than a large conspicuous retinue, the way he spoke about governance and power with the familiarity of someone who wielded both. "My lord," she said slowly, her heart beginning to race again. "Who exactly are you?" Hadrian met her eyes steadily, and she saw the moment he made his decision. "Can we speak privately?" he asked softly. "What I have to say is not for all ears." Isabeau's mouth went dry, but she nodded. They rose from the table, and Hadrian gestured for his men to remain seated. Marjorie started to follow, but Isabeau shook her head slightly, and her friend subsided with obvious reluctance. They walked to the edge of the square, away from the noise and crowds, until they stood in the shadow of the old stone church that had served Thornwick for generations. The autumn sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. In the distance, Isabeau could hear the lowing of cattle being driven home for the evening. Hadrian turned to face her fully, and the dying light caught in his dark hair and cast shadows across the plains of his face. He looked every inch the warrior in that moment, strong and dangerous and utterly compelling. "I need your word," he said, "that what I tell you will remain between us, not because I distrust you, but because knowledge can be a burden as well as a power. Once you know, you cannot unknow it." Isabeau's heart hammered against her ribs. "You have my word. I can keep secrets, my lord. A healer must, or people would never trust her with their ailments and fears." Hadrian studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her sincerity. Finally he nodded. "My full name is Hadrian Aldrich Thornwood. I am the King of England." The world seemed to tilt beneath Isabeau's feet. She had suspected, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. She had kissed the king. She had grabbed the King of England by his shoulders and kissed him in front of her entire village to make her faithless lover jealous. Horror and disbelief warred within her. "I think I need to sit down," she whispered. Hadrian moved quickly, his hand supporting her elbow as he guided her to the church steps. Isabeau sank down onto the cold stone, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The king, the actual king, lowered himself to sit beside her, his expression concerned. "Breathe," he said gently. "Just breathe, Isabeau." She tried, dragging air into her lungs in great gasps. "I kissed you," she managed to say. "I kissed the king. Oh God, I could be arrested for that. I could be executed for assaulting the monarch." "You won't be," Hadrian said firmly. "I'm not going to have you arrested or executed for a kiss, Isabeau. I'm not a tyrant, despite what some of my detractors might claim." "But I used you," Isabeau said, her voice rising with panic. "I used the King of England as a pawn in my petty revenge against Edmund Blackwood. I've committed treason or something equally terrible." "You've done nothing of the sort," Hadrian said, and there was amusement in his voice now. "Treason requires intent to harm the crown or the kingdom. What you did was impulsive and unorthodox, yes, but hardly treasonous. If anything, it's the most honest interaction I've had with anyone in months." Isabeau turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign of mockery or anger. She found neither. Instead, he looked relaxed, more at ease than he had seemed since arriving in the village. It was then that she understood why he had told her the truth, because keeping the secret was exhausting, and something about her had made him want to lay that burden down, if only for a moment. "Why are you here?" she asked. "In Thornwick, I mean. Surely the king has more important places to be." Hadrian's expression sobered. I'm traveling incognito to the northern borders. There have been reports of unrest, of Scottish raiders making increasingly bold incursions into English territory. I wanted to see the situation for myself, rather than relying solely on the reports of others. Sometimes, the only way to understand a problem is to witness it firsthand. So you're going into danger, Isabeau said, understanding dawning. That's why you travel with such a small guard. A larger retinue would attract attention. Exactly. The fewer people who know my identity, the safer I am and the more I can learn. My counselors were horrified when I proposed this journey, but I convinced them it was necessary. Still, I promised to maintain some measure of disguise. He smiled ruefully. Though I suppose that disguise has been somewhat compromised now. I won't tell anyone, Isabeau said quickly. I swear it. Your secret is safe with me. I believe you, Hadrian said, and the simple trust in his words warmed something deep in Isabeau's chest. You're an unusual woman, Isabeau Thorne. Brave enough to speak your mind, honest enough to admit your mistakes, and kind enough to care about my safety, despite the fact that I'm a stranger to you. You're not entirely a stranger anymore, Isabeau pointed out. I have, after all, kissed you. Hadrian laughed, that rich, genuine sound that transformed his face. True enough, though I must confess it was rather a pleasant surprise, impulsive as it was. Isabeau felt heat flood her cheeks again. But this time there was something else mixed with the embarrassment, a flutter of attraction she couldn't quite suppress. Sitting this close to him, she was intensely aware of his presence, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way the fading sunlight caught in his dark hair. He was devastatingly handsome, this king of hers, and kind in a way she hadn't expected from someone who wielded such absolute power. Your Majesty, she began, but he interrupted her. Hadrian, he corrected. When we're alone, just call me Hadrian. I get enough formality at court. Here, in this moment, I'd like to be simply a man speaking with a woman who interests him greatly. The words sent a thrill through Isabeau that she tried desperately to suppress. This was dangerous territory. He was the king, and she was nobody, a village healer with no family, no connections, no importance whatsoever. Whatever this attraction was that hummed between them, it could lead nowhere good. And yet, Hadrian then, she said softly, though it feels strange to address you so casually. I assure you it feels wonderful to me, he replied. Do you know how long it's been since someone spoke to me without calculation, without wondering what favor they could gain or what advantage they could press? Your honesty is like a cool drink of water after years of wine that's gone sour. Isabeau understood in that moment something of the loneliness that must accompany a crown, to never know if people valued you for yourself or for what you could give them, to always wonder if affection was genuine or merely performance. It was a kind of isolation she couldn't fully imagine, and her heart ached for him. That sounds like a heavy burden, she said quietly. It is, Hadrian admitted, but it's the burden I was born to carry. My father wore the crown before me, and his father before him. It's my duty and my privilege to serve my kingdom, even when that service costs me personally. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the sun continued its descent. In the square, the festival was beginning to wind down as families gathered their children and headed home for the evening. Isabeau could see Marjorie watching them from a distance, her expression worried. I should go, Isabeau said reluctantly. People will talk if we're seen alone together for too long, and you don't need that kind of gossip complicating your journey. Perhaps you're right, Hadrian said, though he made no move to rise. But before you go, I have a question for you. A favor, actually. Anything, Isabeau said, then caught herself. Well, within reason. I'm still not entirely sure what one does for a king. Hadrian smiled. Nothing too onerous, I promise. My men and I will be staying in the village tonight, as we planned. Tomorrow we'll continue north, but I find myself hoping that you might agree to dine with us again this evening, properly, in whatever lodgings Elder Aldrich arranges for us. I'd like to continue our conversation, if you're willing. Isabeau knew she should refuse. Every instinct of self-preservation told her that spending more time with this man, this king, was foolish beyond measure. She was already too aware of him, too drawn to his quiet strength and unexpected kindness. Another evening in his company would only deepen an attachment that could bring her nothing but heartache when he inevitably left. But even as these thoughts raced through her mind, she found herself nodding. I'd like that, she said. Yes, I'll come. The smile Hadrian gave her was radiant, transforming his features from merely handsome to absolutely breathtaking. Excellent. I'll send Garrett to fetch you once we're settled. Shall we say 2 hours after sunset? I'll be ready, Isabeau promised. They rose from the church steps, and as they walked back toward the square together, Isabeau caught sight of Edmund watching them with an expression of impotent fury. For a moment she felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction. Her impulsive act had achieved exactly what she'd intended. Edmund was clearly jealous and humiliated. But the satisfaction felt hollow now, overshadowed by the much more complex feelings that Hadrian stirred in her. As they reached the others, Sir Brennan looked between them with knowing eyes. All settled, then? He asked cheerfully. Quite settled, Hadrian replied smoothly. Lady Isabeau has graciously agreed to join us for dinner this evening. Splendid, Sir Brennan said. I'll make sure the accommodations are suitable for entertaining such distinguished company. Isabeau bid them farewell and made her way through the dispersing crowd toward her cottage. Marjorie intercepted her before she'd gone 10 paces, grabbing her arm and pulling her aside. Belle, what is going on? Marjorie demanded in an urgent whisper. You disappeared with that man, that lord, for nearly half an hour, and now you're having dinner with him. Have you lost your senses entirely? Possibly, Isabeau admitted. Marjorie, I can't explain everything right now, but I need you to trust me. There's more to this situation than I can tell you, but I promise I'm not doing anything dangerous or improper. Marjorie's eyes narrowed. He's more than just a lord, isn't he? I've been watching him, Belle. The way those other men treat him, the quality of his things, the way he carries himself. He's someone important. Isabeau hesitated, torn between her promise to Hadrian and her desire to confide in her closest friend. Yes, he's very important. But I've given my word not to reveal his identity, Marjorie. Please, you have to understand. This isn't just village gossip. This is something that could have serious consequences if word got out. Marjorie studied her for a long moment, then sighed. Fine. Keep your secrets. But Belle, be careful. Men like that, important men with power and authority, they don't end up with women like us. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you think might happen, remember that he'll leave, and you'll be the one left behind to deal with the aftermath. The words were harsh, but not unkind, and Isabeau knew they came from a place of genuine concern. I know, she said softly. I know he'll leave, Marjorie. I'm not naive enough to imagine otherwise. But just for tonight, just for a little while, I'd like to enjoy something unexpected and wonderful without worrying about tomorrow. Marjorie's expression softened and she reached out to squeeze Isabeau's hand. Then enjoy it, Belle. God knows you deserve some happiness after everything you've been through. Just guard your heart, that's all I ask. Isabeau returned the squeeze, grateful for her friend's understanding. I'll try. Now I need to get home and make myself presentable. I can't very well dine with him looking like I've spent the day at a harvest festival. Which you have, Marjorie pointed out with a small smile. Go on then. I'll handle any gossip that starts circulating, though I suspect after your dramatic display this afternoon, a quiet dinner will seem positively tame by comparison. Isabeau made her way through the village to her cottage, acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed her. The kiss had indeed become the talk of Thornwick, just as she'd known it would. She caught snippets of conversation as she passed. Speculation about who the handsome stranger was, shock at her brazen behavior, and more than a few crude suggestions about what might happen next. She kept her head high and her pace steady, refusing to show how much the gossip affected her. Her cottage stood at the very edge of the village where the cultivated fields gave way to the wild forest. It was a small structure of stone and timber with a thatched roof that needed repairs she couldn't quite afford. But it was hers, left to her by her grandmother, along with the knowledge and tools of the healing trade. Inside, bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with their mingled scents. Lavender, rosemary, chamomile, and dozens of others. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with clay pots, glass vials, and wooden boxes containing her various remedies and preparations. Isabeau lit the oil lamps and surveyed her limited wardrobe with dismay. She owned 3 dresses, the burgundy wool she currently wore, a faded blue linen for summer, and a dark green wool that had been her grandmother's and was now patched in several places. None of them were remotely suitable for dining with a king, but the green was at least the least worn. She changed quickly, then heated water over her small hearth fire and washed away the dust and sweat of the day. As she worked, her mind kept returning to Hadrian and the impossible situation she found herself in. She had kissed the King of England. The enormity of it kept hitting her in waves. He could have had her thrown in chains for such presumption. He could have been furious, offended, disgusted. Instead, he had laughed and invited her to dinner. More than that, he had confided his identity to her, had trusted her with a secret that could endanger his mission and perhaps his life. Why? Why had he done it? Was it simply because she'd been honest with him, as he claimed? Or was there something more? Something that drew him to her as powerfully as she felt drawn to him? Isabeau caught sight of her reflection in the small, slightly warped mirror that hung by her washing basin. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with an excitement she couldn't quite suppress. She looked alive in a way she hadn't in months, not since before Edmund's betrayal. Perhaps that was part of Hadrian's appeal. He made her feel seen and valued in a way that Edmund never had. Edmund had wanted a pretty ornament to boost his own ego. Hadrian seemed to genuinely want to know her thoughts, her opinions, her true self. But Marjorie was right to warn her about guarding her heart. Hadrian was a king with responsibilities to his kingdom and his crown. Whatever attraction existed between them, it could never lead to anything permanent. Kings didn't marry village healers. They married princesses and noble women, women who could bring alliances and political advantages. At best, she might become a pleasant memory for him, a brief interlude during a difficult journey. At worst, she would end up with a broken heart and a reputation in tatters. Yet even knowing all this, Isabeau couldn't bring herself to regret accepting his invitation. She had spent so much of her life being careful, being proper, being what others expected her to be. Just once, she wanted to be reckless. Just once, she wanted to reach for something extraordinary, even if she couldn't hold on to it. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Through the window, she could see that full darkness had fallen while she prepared. 2 hours had passed more quickly than she'd realized. She opened the door to find young Garrett standing there, looking nervous and awed in equal measure. "My lady," he said, executing an awkward bow. "I've been sent to escort you to dinner, if you're ready." "I'm ready," Isabeau said, pulling her warmest cloak around her shoulders. The night had turned cold, and she could see her breath misting in the air. Garrett led her through the darkened village to what had once been the home of the former bailiff, now deceased. It was the largest house in Thornwick, a 2-story structure with actual glass in some of its windows, a luxury few villagers could afford. Aldrich had clearly given Hadrian and his men the best lodgings available. Inside, a fire blazed in the large hearth, filling the main room with warmth and dancing light. The space had been cleared of its usual clutter, and a table had been set with what Isabeau recognized as the village's finest plates and cups, probably borrowed from several different households. Candles supplemented the firelight, creating an atmosphere that was almost intimate. Hadrian stood as she entered, and Isabeau's breath caught in her throat. He had changed from his travel-worn clothing into a tunic of deep blue wool, richly embroidered at the collar and cuffs with silver thread. Over it he wore a sleeveless surcoat of black, and his dark hair had been brushed back from his face, though a few strands had already escaped to fall across his forehead. He looked every inch the king now, regal and commanding, yet his smile, when he saw her, was warm and genuine. "Isabeau," he said, coming forward to take her hand. "I'm glad you came. I was half afraid you might reconsider." "I gave my word," Isabeau replied, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped at his touch. "And I wanted to come." The other men were present as well, seated around the table with cups of wine already in hand. They greeted her courteously, and Sir Brennan pulled out a chair for her beside Hadrian's place at the head of the table. As she sat, servants, villagers who had been pressed into service for the evening, began bringing out food. It was simple fare by noble standards, Isabeau was sure, but it represented the best Thornwick had to offer. Roasted chicken seasoned with herbs, fresh bread still warm from the oven, a thick stew of root vegetables, and autumn apples baked with honey. "I hope you'll forgive the modest meal," Hadrian said as the food was served. "Though I must say it smells considerably better than most of what we've been eating on the road." "Field rations grow tiresome after the first week," Sir Philip observed dryly. "Give me honest home cooking over salted pork and hard cheese any day." The conversation flowed easily as they ate, and Isabeau found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Hadrian's men treated her with respect rather than the condescension she might have expected from nobles dining with a commoner. Sir Brennan continued his seemingly endless supply of stories, while Sir Thomas offered quieter observations that showed a keen intelligence. Even young Garrett contributed, though he still blushed whenever Isabeau looked directly at him. But it was Hadrian himself who commanded most of Isabeau's attention. He asked her more questions about her work, seeming genuinely interested in the details of herb lore and healing practices. When she mentioned the difficulty of obtaining certain rare ingredients, he immediately wanted to know which ones and why they were hard to find. Feverfew grows wild in some areas, Isabeau explained, but not reliably in our region. It's excellent for headaches and to reduce fever, but I have to trade for it with healers from other villages. The same with willow bark. We have some willows near the river, but not enough to meet the demand, especially in winter when eggs are common. What if you had access to a reliable supplier? Hadrian asked. Someone who could provide these ingredients regularly? Isabeau laughed softly. Then I would be the most fortunate healer in England. But such arrangements cost money, and most of my patients pay me in goods or labor rather than coin. I manage well enough with what I can gather locally and what I can trade for, but I'll never be wealthy. Wealth isn't everything, Hadrian said, his expression thoughtful. You have the respect and gratitude of your community. You ease suffering and save lives. That's worth more than gold. Spoken like someone who has never lacked for gold, Sir Brennan interjected with a grin, earning himself a quelling look from Hadrian. I'm not dismissing the practical concerns, Hadrian said. I know that noble sentiments don't pay for supplies or put food on the table. I'm simply saying that Isabeau's work has value beyond its monetary worth. The conversation turned to other topics. The state of the harvest, the rumors of Scottish raids in the north, the changing political landscape of England. Isabeau listened more than she spoke, absorbing information about a world that usually seemed very distant from her daily life in Thornwick. But she noticed that Hadrian kept drawing her into the discussion, asking her opinions, treating her input as valuable even when she felt woefully uninformed. As the evening wore on and the wine flowed, Hadrian's men began to excuse themselves one by one, until only Isabeau, Hadrian, and Sir Brennan remained. The older knight caught Hadrian's eye, received some silent communication Isabeau couldn't decipher, and stood with a theatrical yawn. Well, I'm for bed, he announced. These old bones aren't what they used to be. Lady Isabeau, it's been a pleasure. I hope we'll see you again before we depart tomorrow. The pleasure was mine, Sir Brennan, Isabeau replied. Thank you for sharing your evening with me. When Brennan had gone, climbing the stairs to the upper rooms, Isabeau found herself alone with Hadrian for the first time since their conversation by the church. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and the candles had guttered low, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, she could hear the wind picking up, whistling around the eaves of the house. More wine? Hadrian asked, reaching for the pitcher. No, thank you, Isabeau said. I've had enough. Any more, and I'll be stumbling home through the dark. I wouldn't let you stumble, Hadrian said quietly. I'd make sure you got home safely. There was something in his voice, an undercurrent of meaning that made Isabeau's heart race. She met his eyes across the table and saw her own awareness reflected there. The attraction that had sparked between them from the moment of that impulsive kiss had only grown stronger throughout the evening. Now, alone in the firelight, it felt almost tangible, a living thing that hummed in the air between them. Hadrian, she said softly, what are we doing? He was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his wine cup. I don't know, he admitted. I only know that I haven't felt this way in a very long time. Perhaps ever. You make me want to be honest, Isabeau. You make me want to set aside the crown and the responsibilities and just be a man, if only for a little while. But you can't set aside the crown, Isabeau said, though her heart ached at the longing in his voice. You are the king. That's not something you can simply choose not to be when it's convenient. I know that, Hadrian said, a note of frustration creeping into his tone. Believe me, I know. The crown is mine until death, and with it comes duties I cannot shirk. But must it consume everything? Must I sacrifice every personal desire, every chance at happiness, on the altar of kingship? Isabeau heard the pain beneath his words, the weariness of a man who had carried a tremendous burden for too long without relief. She wanted to comfort him, to ease that pain somehow, but she didn't know how. What comfort could a village healer offer a king? You said you've never felt this way before, she ventured. But surely that is, a man like you must have had many opportunities for companionship. Hadrian's laugh was bitter. Opportunities, yes. But companionship? True connection? No, Isabeau. I've had women throw themselves at me since I was barely old enough to understand why. But they wanted the crown, not the man. They saw power and privilege, not a person. Even my betrothed. He stopped abruptly, his jaw clenching. Your betrothed? Isabeau felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Of course he was betrothed. He was a king. Political marriages were arranged for people like him from birth. How foolish she had been to think, even for a moment, that there might be a future for them. I was betrothed, Hadrian corrected, Lady Genevieve of Ashford. Our marriage was arranged when we were children, a political alliance between powerful houses. She died of a fever last spring, 2 months before our wedding was to take place. I'm sorry, Isabeau said automatically, though she felt a guilty surge of something that might have been relief. Don't be, Hadrian said flatly. She despised me, and the feeling was mutual. We had met perhaps a dozen times in our lives, always under the watchful eyes of our families and counselors. She made it abundantly clear that she viewed our marriage as a duty to be endured, nothing more. Her death was tragic, of course, but I can't pretend to have mourned the loss of our betrothal. And now? Isabeau asked. Surely your counselors are already arranging another match. They are, Hadrian confirmed. I have proposals from half the noble families in England and several from the continent, each one promising great political advantages, strategic alliances, and absolutely nothing in the way of genuine affection or partnership. He leaned forward, his eyes intense in the candlelight. Do you know what it's like to know that you'll spend your life with someone chosen for political convenience, rather than any real compatibility? To understand that love, true love, is a luxury you'll never be permitted? Isabeau's throat tightened with emotion at the raw honesty in his words. She had never considered the personal cost of wearing a crown, had never thought about the sacrifices demanded of those born to rule. That sounds like a prison, she said softly. A gilded cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. It is exactly that, Hadrian agreed. And yet, what choice do I have? I was born to this role, and I have a duty to my kingdom. My personal happiness is secondary to the good of England. I accepted that truth long ago. He paused, his gaze never leaving her face. But then I rode into this little village, and a beautiful woman with moss-green eyes and more courage than sense kissed me in front of everyone. And for the first time in my life, I found myself wondering what it might be like to choose for myself, rather than having my choices made for me. Isabeau's breath caught. The intensity of his gaze, the barely restrained longing in his voice, it was almost too much to bear. Hadrian, we barely know each other. What you're feeling might just be the novelty of the situation, the appeal of something forbidden. Do you truly believe that? Hadrian challenged. Because I don't. I've had plenty of novel situations, Isabeau, and many forbidden temptations. None of them affected me the way you do. When you speak, I want to listen. When you smile, I want to be the reason for it. When I think about leaving tomorrow and never seeing you again, I feel something close to grief. Isabeau stood abruptly, the emotion swirling through her, too powerful to contain while sitting still. She moved to the window, looking out at the darkness beyond. Behind her, she heard Hadrian rise and cross the room. He stopped just behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, but not quite touching. I feel it too, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Whatever this is between us, I feel it. But feeling something doesn't make it possible, Hadrian. You're the king. I'm nobody. There's no future for us, no matter how much we might wish otherwise. What if we stopped thinking about the future for a moment? Hadrian said, his breath warm against her ear. What if we allowed ourselves just this one night to be simply a man and a woman who are drawn to each other? Isabeau closed her eyes, torn between desire and reason. Every logical part of her mind screamed that this was dangerous, that she would only end up hurt. But her heart, her foolish, reckless heart, yearned to say yes, to take what happiness she could find, even if it was fleeting. One night, she said finally, turning to face him, and then you leave, and we both go back to our real lives. No promises, no expectations beyond tonight. Hadrian's hand came up to cup her cheek. his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. If that's all you're willing to give, then I'll take it gratefully. But Isabeau, I want you to know, this isn't just physical desire, though God knows I desire you. I genuinely care about you. In one afternoon, you've made me feel more alive, more myself, than I have in years. Before she could respond, he lowered his head and kissed her. This kiss was nothing like the brief surprised contact of that afternoon in the square. This was deep and passionate, a claiming and a surrender all at once. Isabeau's arms came up to wind around his neck as she rose on her toes to meet him. His hands spanned her waist, pulling her closer until their bodies pressed together, and she could feel the hard muscle beneath his fine clothes, the steady beat of his heart against her breast. Time seemed to lose meaning as they kissed. The fire crackled in the hearth, the wind howled outside, but Isabeau was aware of nothing beyond Hadrian's mouth on hers, his hands moving up her back, the intoxicating scent of him, leather and wood smoke and something uniquely male. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she felt dizzy with desire and emotion. "Stay," Hadrian whispered against her lips. "Stay with me tonight, Isabeau. Let me show you how much you've come to mean to me." Isabeau knew she should refuse, should cling to propriety and common sense, but she had been proper and sensible her entire life. And where had it gotten her? Edmund's betrayal had shown her how little her careful behavior had protected her from pain or gossip. If she was going to be talked about anyway, if her heart was going to break regardless, at least let it break over something real and meaningful, rather than the petty cruelties of a faithless man. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I'll stay." The joy that flooded Hadrian's expression made her certain she had made the right choice. He kissed her again, slower this time, more tender, as if savoring every moment. Then he took her hand and led her to the stairs. The upper floor contained several small bedrooms, and he guided her to the largest, where a fire already burned in the grate, and candles cast a warm glow across a bed piled high with furs and woolen blankets. What followed was a night Isabeau knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Hadrian was an attentive lover, patient and generous, more concerned with her pleasure than his own. He learned her body with the same focused intensity he had shown when listening to her speak, discovering what made her gasp and sigh, what brought her to trembling peaks of sensation she had never experienced before. And when they finally came together, it was with a connection that went far beyond the physical, a joining that felt almost sacred in its intensity. Afterward they lay tangled together beneath the furs, Isabeau's head resting on Hadrian's chest as his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The fire had burned down to embers, and through the window she could see the first hints of dawn beginning to lighten the eastern sky. "I wish we could stop time," Hadrian murmured into her hair. "I wish I could keep you here in this moment forever." "But we can't," Isabeau said, though the words hurt to speak. "Time moves forward whether we will it or not, and you have responsibilities waiting for you. A kingdom that needs its king." "I know," Hadrian sighed. "I know my duty, even when it demands more than I want to give." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Come with me." Isabeau lifted her head to look at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Come with me?" Hadrian repeated, his eyes earnest in the dim light. "Travel north with us. I know it's not a permanent solution, but it would give us more time together. A few more days, perhaps a week. I'm not ready to let you go, Isabeau. Not yet." The offer was tempting, desperately so. To have more time with him, to extend this magical interlude beyond a single night. It was everything she wanted. But reality intruded, cold and unforgiving. "I can't," she said, hating the words even as she spoke them. "Hadrian, I have responsibilities too. The village depends on me for healing. Old Thomas needs his salve for his joints, and Widow Blackthorn's daughter is due to give birth any day now. I can't just abandon them to chase after." She stopped, unsure how to finish. "After a king who can offer you nothing but heartache?" Hadrian finished bitterly. "You're right, of course. I'm being selfish, asking you to give up your life and your duties for my sake. Forgive me." "There's nothing to forgive," Isabeau said, pressing a kiss to his chest. "I understand the impulse. If our situations were different, if we were different people." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. They lay in silence as the dawn grew brighter, both knowing that their time together was rapidly running out. Isabeau committed every detail to memory, The sound of Hadrian's heartbeat beneath her ear, the warmth of his skin against hers, the way his arm held her close, as if he could keep the world at bay through sheer force of will. When full morning arrived, they dressed in silence, the weight of impending separation hanging heavy between them. Hadrian helped her lace her dress, his fingers lingering on the ties longer than necessary. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her one last time, pouring all his unspoken feelings into the contact. "I won't forget you, Isabeau Thorne," he said when they parted. "No matter where I go or what I do, I will carry the memory of this night, of you, for the rest of my life. And I won't forget you," Isabeau whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My king." She slipped out of the house while the village was still quiet, before most people had risen to start their day. The walk back to her cottage felt surreal, as if she were moving through a dream. Her body still tingled with the memory of Hadrian's touch, and her heart felt simultaneously full and breaking. Inside her cottage, she sat on her bed and allowed herself to cry. Not bitter tears of regret, but bittersweet tears for something beautiful that could never be more than it was. She had known from the beginning that this would end in heartache, but she couldn't bring herself to regret her choice. Better to have one perfect night with a man who truly saw her than a lifetime of Edmund's shallow affection. A knock at her door interrupted her tears. She wiped her eyes and composed herself before opening it to find Marjorie standing there with a basket of fresh bread and a knowing look. "I saw you leaving the old bailiff's house," Marjorie said without preamble. "Don't bother denying it. The question is, are you all right?" Isabeau managed a wobbly smile. "I'm all right. My heart is going to break when he leaves, but I'm all right." Marjorie stepped inside and enveloped her in a warm hug. "Oh, Belle, you actually did it, didn't you? You let yourself fall for him." "I didn't mean to," Isabeau said, her voice muffled against Marjorie's shoulder. "It just happened. He's everything Edmund wasn't. Kind and thoughtful and genuinely interested in who I am rather than just how I look. And now he's leaving, and I'll probably never see him again." "Then you make the most of the time you have left," Marjorie said firmly, pulling back to look at her. "He hasn't left yet, has he? So dry those tears, wash your face, and go say a proper goodbye." Isabeau nodded, grateful for her friend's practical wisdom. She did as Marjorie suggested, making herself presentable once more. By the time she returned to the village square, Hadrian and his men were preparing to depart. Their horses had been brought out and provisioned for travel, and a small crowd had gathered to see the distinguished visitors off. Hadrian was speaking with Elder Aldrich, thanking him for the village's hospitality, when he caught sight of Isabeau. His entire demeanor changed, his formal courtesy giving way to open warmth. He excused himself and came to her, taking her hand in full view of everyone. "I was hoping I'd see you before we left," he said quietly. "I couldn't let you go without saying goodbye properly," Isabeau replied. Not after last night," Hadrian finished. "Isabeau, I know we agreed it was just one night, but I need you to know. If circumstances were different, if I were free to choose my own path, I would choose you, without hesitation." The words simultaneously warmed and broke her heart. "I know," she whispered, "and I would choose you too. But we are who we are, and we must live with that reality." Hadrian's jaw tightened, and for a moment she saw rebellion flash in his eyes. But then duty reasserted itself, and he nodded reluctantly. "Before I go, I want to give you something." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather purse that clinked with the sound of coins. "Please take this. Use it to buy the supplies you need. The feverfew, the willow bark, whatever will help you serve your village better." Isabeau started to refuse. It felt too much like payment for their night together, and the thought made her feel ill. But Hadrian anticipated her objection. "It's not what you're thinking," he said quickly. "This isn't compensation or charity. Consider it a royal grant to a skilled healer who serves her community well. You've earned it through your work, not through anything that happened between us personally." Put that way, Isabeau could accept without feeling diminished. She took the purse, feeling the weight of it. There was more money here than she typically saw in a year. "Thank you," she said. "This will help so many people." "Good," Hadrian said with satisfaction. "Then something good will come from my time in Thornwick beyond my own happiness." He glanced around at the watching villagers, clearly aware of their audience. When he looked back at Isabeau, his expression was intense. "I wish I could kiss you goodbye, but I suspect that would cause even more talk than yesterday's kiss did." "Probably," Isabeau agreed with a small, sad smile. So we'll say goodbye like civilized people, with dignity and restraint. Dignity and restraint, Hadrian echoed. Two things I've had far too much practice with. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. Goodbye, Isabeau Thorne. May your life be filled with joy and your work blessed with success. Goodbye, Hadrian, she whispered, not caring who heard her use his given name. May you find the happiness you deserve, wherever your path leads. He released her hand reluctantly and turned to mount his horse. His men were already mounted and waiting, though she noticed Sir Brennan watching the farewell with an expression that might have been sympathy. Hadrian swung into his saddle with practiced ease, gathering the reins in one hand. As the group began to ride out of the village, Hadrian looked back one last time. Their eyes met across the distance, and Isabeau saw in his gaze all the things they hadn't said, all the possibilities that would never be realized. Then he turned his face forward and rode on, disappearing around the bend in the road that led north toward the borderlands and his waiting duties. Isabeau stood watching long after he had vanished from sight, the leather purse heavy in her hands and her heart heavier still in her chest. Around her the village began to buzz with speculation and gossip, but she paid it no mind. Let them talk. They would never understand what she had shared with Hadrian, the connection that had formed in such a brief time. And that was fine. Some things were too precious to be explained to those who hadn't experienced them. The days following Hadrian's departure passed in a blur of numbness and routine. Isabeau threw herself into her work with renewed intensity, as if staying busy might somehow ease the ache in her chest. She used Hadrian's generous gift to purchase supplies from traveling merchants, not just the feverfew and willow bark she had mentioned, but also rare oils, fresh bandages, and several valuable medicinal herbs she had never been able to afford before. Her stores were better stocked than they had been in years, and she was able to help people who had previously suffered without adequate treatment. The village, of course, talked of little else but her scandalous behavior and the mysterious nobleman who had captured her attention so completely. Most of the gossip was unkind, particularly from the older women who clucked their tongues and whispered about loose morals and shame. But Isabeau found, to her surprise, that she didn't care as much as she thought she would. What did their narrow-minded judgment matter, compared to what she had experienced? They could never understand the connection she had shared with Hadrian, and she wouldn't diminish it by defending herself to people who had already made up their minds. Edmund, predictably, had been insufferable. He had confronted her 3 days after Hadrian left, cornering her at the village well while she drew water. His face was flushed with anger and what might have been wounded pride. "I suppose you're quite pleased with yourself," he had sneered. "Throwing yourself at some passing lord like a common trollop. Did you think it would make me jealous? Did you think I would come running back to you?" Isabeau had looked at him with clear eyes, seeing him truly for the first time since his betrayal. He was handsome enough, she supposed, in a rough, simple way. But compared to Hadrian's quiet strength and genuine kindness, Edmund seemed shallow and small. His cruelty came from insecurity, from a need to tear others down to build himself up. She wondered how she had ever thought herself in love with him. "Edmund," she had said calmly, "I didn't do any of it for you. In fact, you were the furthest thing from my mind. I'm sorry if that wounds your pride, but it's the truth. What happened between me and Lord Hadrian had nothing to do with you at all." The shock on his face had been almost comical. He had sputtered and blustered, trying to reassert control of the conversation, but Isabeau had simply picked up her water bucket and walked away, leaving him standing alone by the well. It had felt remarkably freeing. Margaret had broken off their courtship shortly after, apparently having learned from other girls about Edmund's habit of declaring eternal love before moving on within days. Isabeau might have felt vindicated, but she found she felt only a distant pity for them both. They deserved each other, really, both vain and shallow, more concerned with appearances than substance. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Autumn deepened into early winter, and the first frost silvered the fields each morning. Isabeau continued her work, tending to coughs and fevers and the various ailments that plagued the village as the weather turned cold. At night, alone in her cottage, she would sometimes allow herself to remember that one perfect night with Hadrian, the warmth of his touch, the sound of his voice, the way he had looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The memories were bittersweet, bringing both comfort and pain. She told herself she was getting over him, that the sharp edge of loss was dulling with time. But then something would trigger a memory: the scent of wood smoke, the sight of a rider on a dark horse, the sound of deep laughter, and the ache would return with renewed force. She had known it would be like this. She had gone into that night with her eyes open, accepting that heartbreak was the price of one night of happiness. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. It was nearly a month after Hadrian's departure when everything changed. Isabeau was in her cottage, grinding dried chamomile for a sleeping draught, when she heard the sound of many horses approaching the village. Her heart leaped traitorously before she could suppress the hope. It wouldn't be him. Of course it wouldn't be him. He was probably in the far north by now, or perhaps even returned to his court and the business of ruling. But curiosity drew her to the window nonetheless. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. A large group of riders was indeed entering Thornwick, but these were not the small, discreet company Hadrian had traveled with. This was a full royal procession, at least 20 mounted soldiers in the king's livery, banners flying, and in their midst, a covered litter carried by 4 horses. The village erupted into chaos. People poured from their homes, bowing and gaping at the unexpected display of royal authority. Elder Aldrich rushed forward, his old legs moving faster than Isabeau had seen in years, clearly panicked about receiving such distinguished visitors without warning. Isabeau's hands trembled as she set down her mortar and pestle. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Had something happened to Hadrian? Was this some royal messenger come to punish her for her presumption? Or, and this thought made her heart pound almost painfully, had he returned? She forced herself to take several deep breaths before leaving her cottage and making her way toward the village square. By the time she arrived, the procession had halted and the soldiers were dismounting. One of them, an officer by the look of his finer armor, was speaking with Aldrich in tones too low for Isabeau to hear. Then the curtain of the litter was drawn back, and Isabeau's world tilted. Hadrian stepped out, and her breath left her in a rush. He looked different than he had a month ago. He wore full royal regalia now, a surcoat emblazoned with the royal arms over gleaming armor, and a circlet of gold rested on his dark hair. There was no mistaking his identity now. This was not a nobleman traveling incognito. This was the King of England in all his power and authority. His eyes swept the crowd and found her immediately, as if drawn by some invisible thread. The relief and joy that flooded his expression was so open, so unguarded, that Isabeau felt tears prick her eyes. He moved toward her with long strides, and the crowd parted before him like water, leaving a clear path between them. "Isabeau," he said, and his voice carried clearly in the sudden silence. "Thank God. I was afraid." He stopped, seeming to remember their audience. His expression became more formal, though his eyes remained warm. "Lady Isabeau Thorne, I require a private audience with you. Immediately." Isabeau could only nod, her throat too tight for speech. Hadrian gestured to 2 of his soldiers, who quickly cleared a path to the old bailiff's house where he had stayed before. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Isabeau walked beside the king, her mind reeling with questions and possibilities. What was he doing here? Why had he returned? And why in full royal display rather than the discretion he had preferred before? Inside the house, Hadrian dismissed the soldiers with a curt command, and suddenly they were alone. The moment the door closed, his formal demeanor cracked, and he reached for her hands, pulling her close. "Isabeau," he breathed, his forehead coming to rest against hers. "I tried to stay away. I swear I tried. I went north. I dealt with the border troubles. I did everything I was supposed to do. But every night, every quiet moment, my thoughts returned to you. I couldn't forget you. I didn't want to forget you." "Hadrian, what are you doing here?" Isabeau asked, her voice shaking. "Why did you come back?" He pulled away just enough to look into her eyes, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Because I realized something during these past weeks. I've spent my entire life doing my duty, making sacrifices for the good of the kingdom, putting my personal desires last. And I've been miserable for it. When I met you, when we spent that night together, I finally understood what I had been missing. Connection, genuine affection, someone who sees me, Hadrian, not just the crown I wear." "I don't understand," Isabeau whispered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've decided to stop sacrificing my happiness on the altar of political convenience." Hadrian said firmly. I've spent these weeks consulting with my counselors, reviewing the laws, finding a path forward, and I've come to offer you a choice, Isabeau. A real choice, with full knowledge of what it means. Isabeau's heart hammered so hard she felt dizzy. What choice? Hadrian took a deep breath, and she saw nervousness flicker across his face, an expression she had never seen him wear before. I want you to come back to court with me, not as a mistress or a secret shame, but openly, as the woman I'm courting with intent to marry. The words hit Isabeau like a physical blow. For a moment she was certain she had misheard, that her desperate wishes had conjured impossible words from thin air. Marry? Hadrian, you can't marry me. I'm nobody. I have no title, no lands, no political connections. You have something far more valuable. Hadrian interrupted. You have integrity, intelligence, compassion, and strength of character. You see people, truly see them, and you care about their suffering. Those are the qualities I want in a queen, not some arbitrary bloodline or political alliance. Your counselors will never agree to this, Isabeau said, though her heart soared at his words. The nobility will be outraged. You'll face opposition from everyone. Let them oppose, Hadrian said with fierce determination. I am the king. My word is law. Yes, there will be those who object, who think I'm making a terrible mistake. But there are also laws and precedents that allow a king to choose his own bride, even one of common birth. It's rare, but not unheard of. Several of my ancestors married for love rather than politics. I'm simply following their example. Isabeau's mind whirled. Everything he was saying seemed impossible, like something from a tale sung by wandering minstrels. Kings didn't marry village healers. They married princesses and great ladies, women who could bring armies and alliances to the marriage bed. And yet Hadrian stood before her, entirely serious, offering her exactly that impossibility. What about heirs? She asked, grasping for objections. The nobility will want to ensure the succession. They'll say I'm not suitable to be the mother of future kings. Then they'll be wrong. Hadrian said simply, You're intelligent, healthy, and strong. There's no reason you couldn't bear heirs, and any child of ours would be legitimate and recognized, with full rights to the throne. I'll make sure of it. Hadrian, this is madness, Isabeau said, but she could hear the weakening of her own resistance in her voice. He was offering her everything she had thought impossible, not just a future with him, but a real, legitimate place at his side. How could she possibly refuse? It's not madness, Hadrian insisted. It's the sanest decision I've ever made. Isabeau, I've lived my entire life according to other people's expectations. I've been the dutiful son, the responsible king, the perfect monarch who never puts his own needs first. And it's made me hollow inside, going through the motions of life without truly living. You changed that. You made me feel alive again. You gave me hope that I could have both duty and happiness. Don't make me go back to that empty existence. Please. The raw vulnerability in his voice broke through Isabeau's last defenses. She saw in his eyes the same longing she felt, the same desperate hope for a future neither of them had dared to believe possible. And she realized that if she refused him now, if she sent him away out of fear or propriety, or concern for what others might think, she would regret it for the rest of her life. Are you certain? She asked quietly. Truly certain. Because once I say yes, once I commit to this path, there's no going back. We'll both have to see it through, regardless of the opposition we face. I've never been more certain of anything, Hadrian said without hesitation. Isabeau Thorne, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Will you be my queen? Tears spilled down Isabeau's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Hadrian's face transformed with joy, and he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion tempered by tenderness, and Isabeau felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hadrian rested his forehead against hers. I need to warn you, he said quietly. The path ahead won't be easy. There will be nobles who resent you, courtiers who try to undermine you, and endless scrutiny of everything you do. Court life is complicated and often cruel. Are you prepared for that? Isabeau thought of the gossip and judgment she had already endured in her small village. If she could weather that storm, surely she could face down courtiers and nobles. I'm not afraid, she said firmly. As long as we face it together. Together, Hadrian agreed. Always together. He pulled back slightly, his expression becoming more serious. There are practicalities we need to discuss. I'll need to return to court soon to begin making arrangements, announcements to be made, objections to be addressed, a wedding to plan. But I don't want to rush you or make you feel pressured. If you need time to prepare, to say goodbye to your life here. No, Isabeau interrupted. I don't need time. My life here has been good in many ways, but it's also been limited and lonely. The work I do is important, but someone else can be trained to do it. The attachments I have are few. Marjorie will understand. And the others, she shrugged. They've already judged me harshly for our first encounter. They'll judge me just as harshly for this, no matter how I try to explain. I'd rather leave sooner and start our new life together than draw out the goodbye. Hadrian searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he nodded slowly. Then we leave tomorrow morning. That will give you time to gather whatever belongings you want to bring and say your farewells. I'll have my men help you pack anything you need. I don't have much, Isabeau said with a slightly shaky laugh. A few dresses, my grandmother's things, my healing supplies. It won't take long. Bring whatever has meaning to you, Hadrian said. Your grandmother's possessions especially. I know how important she was to you. And your healing supplies as well. Just because you'll be queen doesn't mean you have to abandon that part of yourself. In fact, I think your knowledge could be valuable at court. The royal physicians are skilled, but they tend to focus on treating nobility. Your perspective, your understanding of how to help common people with limited resources, could benefit many. The thoughtfulness of his words warmed Isabeau's heart. He wasn't asking her to become someone else, to abandon everything that made her who she was. He wanted her to bring those qualities to her new role, to enhance rather than diminish them. We should go out and make the announcement, Hadrian said. The villagers will be wild with speculation by now, and I'd rather they hear the truth directly from us. Isabeau's stomach fluttered with nerves, but she squared her shoulders and nodded. Let's tell them together. They emerged from the house to find that the entire village had gathered in the square, along with Hadrian's soldiers and retinue. The crowd fell silent as the king appeared, all eyes fixed on him and the woman at his side. Isabeau spotted Marjorie near the front of the crowd, her face a mixture of shock and barely contained excitement. Edmund stood farther back, his expression one of pure disbelief. Hadrian raised his hand for silence, though none was needed. His voice carried clearly across the square, every word pronounced with the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. People of Thornwick, I have an announcement to make. When I last visited your village, I had the extraordinary good fortune to meet Lady Isabeau Thorne. In the time since, I have come to recognize her exceptional qualities, her intelligence, her compassion, her strength of character. These are qualities I value highly, and I have decided that I want her by my side, not just for a day or a week, but for the rest of my life. A ripple of shocked murmurs ran through the crowd. Isabeau felt her cheeks burning but kept her head high, her hand firmly clasped in Hadrian's. I have asked Lady Isabeau to do me the great honor of becoming my wife and your queen, Hadrian continued. She has accepted. We will be married at court in 6 weeks' time, and I expect that all of England will celebrate this union with the joy and respect it deserves. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, gradually, people began to react. Some faces showed genuine happiness. Marjorie was crying and smiling at the same time, and several of the village children clapped with innocent delight. Others looked shocked, scandalized, or in Edmund's case, positively ill. But none dared to voice objection aloud, not with the king himself standing before them. Elder Aldrich stepped forward, his aged body trembling as he bowed low. Your Majesty, this is tremendous news. The village of Thornwick is deeply honored that one of our own has found such favor in your eyes. We wish you both every happiness and long life together. Thank you, Elder, Hadrian said warmly. Isabeau has spoken highly of this village and its people. I trust you will treat her memory with the respect it deserves after she departs. She has served you well as a healer, and that service should not be forgotten. It was both a statement and a warning, Isabeau realized. Hadrian was making it clear that any gossip or slander directed at her would not be tolerated. The message was received. Several villagers who had been whispering suddenly looked decidedly nervous. Marjorie pushed her way through the crowd, tears streaming down her round cheeks. Belle, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Oh, Belle, I can't believe it. You're going to be queen. Isabeau pulled her friend into a tight embrace. I can scarcely believe it myself, she admitted quietly. Marjorie, I'm going to need your help getting ready. Will you help me pack? Will you stay with me tonight so we can talk like we used to? Of course, Marjorie said immediately. I wouldn't miss it for the world, though I warn you, I'm going to cry the entire time. Hadrian excused himself to see to his men and make arrangements for the night's lodging, leaving Isabeau to face the well-wishers and the curious. Most people approached with congratulations that seemed genuine enough, though Isabeau could see the calculation behind some of their smiles. They were already wondering how to benefit from her new position, what favors they might ask of the king's wife. Edmund, she noticed, had disappeared entirely. She felt a moment of satisfaction at that, then pushed the unworthy thought aside. Edmund and his petty jealousies belonged to her old life. She had far more important things to think about now. The afternoon passed in a whirlwind of activity. Hadrian's soldiers helped carry Isabeau's belongings from her cottage to a cart that would transport them to court. She packed her grandmother's things with special care, the old woman's healing journal filled with recipes and remedies, her collection of clay pots and implements, even her worn shawl that still somehow carried the faint scent of lavender. These tangible connections to her past seemed even more precious now that she was about to step into an entirely new future. As promised, Marjorie stayed close, chattering excitedly about what court life might be like, what Isabeau should expect, what she should be careful of. You'll need to watch out for the ambitious ladies, Marjorie warned. They'll pretend to be your friends while trying to supplant you, or use you for their own advancement. And the men will be even worse. Everyone will want to curry favor with the king's wife. I know, Isabeau said quietly. Hadrian warned me it wouldn't be easy. But Marjorie, when I'm with him, when I see how he looks at me and listen to how he speaks to me, I believe we can weather any storm together. He makes me feel valued in a way I've never experienced before. I'm happy for you, truly, Marjorie said, squeezing her hand. You deserve this happiness, Belle. You've spent so long taking care of others and putting yourself last. It's about time someone put you first. That evening, Hadrian arranged for a feast in the village square, his gift to Thornwick and his way of celebrating the betrothal publicly. Tables were laden with food purchased from his own supplies, and ale flowed freely. Musicians played and people danced, despite the cold autumn air. Isabeau sat beside Hadrian at the head table, very aware of the honor being shown to her and to the village. Throughout the evening, Hadrian was attentive without being overbearing. He included her in conversations with his officers, asked her opinion on various matters, and made sure she was comfortable. Sir Brennan regaled the villagers with tales of battles and adventures, carefully edited to be appropriate for all ages, while Sir Philip and Sir Thomas engaged the village men in discussions of farming and trade. As the night wore on and the celebration continued, Hadrian leaned close to Isabeau and spoke quietly. Are you having second thoughts? You seem pensive. Isabeau shook her head. Not second thoughts, exactly. More like trying to reconcile who I was yesterday with who I'll be tomorrow. Yesterday I was Isabeau the healer, living in a small cottage at the edge of a forgotten village. Tomorrow I'll be the king's betrothed, traveling to court to become a queen. It's a lot to absorb. You'll still be Isabeau, Hadrian said firmly. The titles and circumstances may change, but the woman I fell in love with, her strength, her kindness, her sharp mind, those things remain constant. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you that you need to become someone else to fit your new role. The role needs to fit you, not the other way around. Fell in love with, Isabeau repeated softly, her heart skipping at the words. You never said that before. Hadrian's expression grew tender. Didn't I? I suppose I was trying to maintain some semblance of restraint, but there's no point in pretending anymore, is there? Yes, Isabeau, I love you. I think I started falling the moment you kissed me in this very square, and I've been falling ever since. You've captured my heart completely. Tears pricked Isabeau's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. I tried not to. I told myself it was foolish and impossible and would only lead to heartache, but I couldn't help it. You're everything I never knew I needed. Hadrian raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles while holding her gaze. Around them, the villagers pretended not to watch, but Isabeau could feel their eyes on them. Let them look, she thought. Let them see that this was real. that it was based on genuine affection and not just royal whim. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually Isabeau excused herself, knowing that tomorrow would be a long and momentous day. Marjorie walked with her back to the cottage one last time, both of them silent as they contemplated the magnitude of the change that was coming. Inside the cottage, Isabeau looked around at the familiar space, the herbs hanging from the rafters, the simple furniture, the small hearth where she had cooked countless meals. This had been her home for years, the place where she had grieved her grandmother and built her life as a healer. Tomorrow, she would leave it behind forever. "Are you scared?" Marjorie asked quietly. "Terrified," Isabeau admitted, "but also excited, also hopeful. I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong, all the ways I might fail or disappoint people. But then I remember how Hadrian looks at me, and I think maybe, just maybe, we can make this work." They talked long into the night, reminiscing about their childhood together, laughing over shared memories and crying over the realization that their lives were diverging in ways they had never imagined. When Marjorie finally left just before dawn, they embraced tightly, both knowing that while their friendship would endure, it would necessarily change. Isabeau would be queen, and that position would create a distance between them that couldn't be entirely bridged. The morning of departure arrived gray and cold, with frost coating every surface and the breath of horses and humans alike rising in white clouds. Hadrian's soldiers assembled in precise formation, a display of military discipline that impressed the villagers. The cart carrying Isabeau's possessions was loaded and ready, and Hadrian had provided a gentle mare for her to ride, since she had never owned a horse of her own. Isabeau wore her best dress, the green wool that had been her grandmother's, and over it, a new cloak that Hadrian had given her, lined with fur and fastened with a silver brooch worked in an intricate knotwork pattern. It was the finest thing she had ever owned, and wearing it made her feel both honored and slightly overwhelmed. The entire village turned out to see them off. Elder Aldrich gave a rambling speech about Thornwick's pride in their native daughter and their loyalty to the crown. Several villagers presented small gifts, a carefully embroidered handkerchief, a jar of the finest honey, a small wooden carving of a bird. Isabeau accepted each with genuine gratitude, touched by these gestures from people who had so recently been gossiping about her. Even Edmund appeared, standing at the back of the crowd with a sullen expression. Isabeau caught his eye for a moment and saw the regret there, the belated understanding of what he had lost. She felt a flash of pity for him, but nothing more. That chapter of her life was closed. Marjorie was the last to say goodbye, and both women were crying openly by the time they embraced. "Write to me," Marjorie begged. "Tell me everything about court life. And Belle, be happy. That's all I want for you." "I will," Isabeau promised. "And you be happy too. Find a good man, one who deserves you. Have the family you've always wanted. And know that no matter how far apart we are, you'll always be my dearest friend." Hadrian helped Isabeau mount her horse, his hand steady and reassuring. Then he swung up onto his own destrier, a magnificent black stallion that danced with barely restrained energy. He raised his hand in farewell to the villagers, and the procession began to move. Isabeau looked back as they rode out of Thornwick, watching the village grow smaller in the distance. She saw Marjorie still standing in the square, waving, and she waved back until her friend was just a tiny speck. Then she turned to face forward, toward the unknown future that awaited her. Hadrian rode beside her, close enough that their stirrups occasionally brushed. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Isabeau thought about it honestly before answering. "Sadness at leaving, yes. Nervousness about what comes next, absolutely. But regrets? No. I'm exactly where I want to be." Hadrian's smile was radiant. "As am I." They rode through countryside that grew increasingly unfamiliar to Isabeau. She had rarely traveled more than a few miles from Thornwick in her entire life, and now she was seeing landscapes she had only heard about in travelers' tales. Rolling hills gave way to dense forests, then to open plains where the wind swept unimpeded across vast distances. The journey took several days, with nights spent in inns or, when they were between towns, in camps set up by Hadrian's soldiers. Throughout the journey, Hadrian remained attentive, making sure Isabeau was comfortable, engaging her in conversation, and gradually preparing her for what to expect at court. "My chief counselor is Lord Ravencroft," Hadrian explained one evening as they sat by the campfire. "He's a practical man, more interested in effective governance than rigid tradition. He'll likely be your strongest supporter among the nobles, once he gets over his initial shock at my choice of bride. And who will be my strongest opponent? Isabeau asked pragmatically. Hadrian's expression darkened. Probably Lady Beatrice of Northumberland. She had hopes of marrying me herself, or failing that, marrying me to her daughter. She's influential at court and not someone to be underestimated. But Isabeau, I won't let anyone mistreat you. You have my protection and my authority behind you. I don't want to hide behind you, Isabeau said firmly. I want to earn respect on my own merits. Yes, I'll need your support, but I also need to prove that I deserve my position through my own actions. Hadrian looked at her with such pride and affection that Isabeau felt her cheeks warm. That's exactly the attitude that convinced me you would make an excellent queen. You understand that power must be earned and maintained through action, not just inherited or assumed. On the 5th day of travel, they crested a hill, and Isabeau saw the capital city spread out before them in the valley below. It was larger than anything she had imagined, a sprawling mass of buildings contained within high stone walls, with church spires and noble houses rising above the ordinary structures. And dominating it all, on a hill at the city's center, stood the royal palace, a massive complex of stone towers and walls that spoke of both strength and grandeur. Isabeau's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the capital city stretching before them. The sheer scale of it overwhelmed her senses. Thousands upon thousands of buildings, more people than she could possibly imagine living in one place, and at its heart, the palace that would soon be her home. The enormity of what she had agreed to suddenly felt very real and very daunting. Hadrian must have sensed her apprehension because he reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. I know it's overwhelming, he said quietly, but remember, you don't have to face it alone. I'll be with you every step of the way. Isabeau nodded, drawing strength from his presence. It's beautiful, she said, and it was true. Despite her nervousness, she could appreciate the grandeur of the city, the way the afternoon sun caught on the river that wound through it, the bustling energy that she could almost feel even from this distance. As they descended toward the city gates, people began to line the streets, word having apparently spread of the king's return. Isabeau was acutely aware of the stares directed at her, the whispers that followed their procession. She kept her head high and her expression calm, even as her heart raced with anxiety. These were her future subjects, and their opinion of her would matter greatly in the days and years to come. The palace gates opened before them, and they rode into a massive courtyard where what seemed like hundreds of servants and courtiers had assembled. Isabeau recognized the formal reception for what it was, a display of the court's hierarchy and power, and her first real test of how she would be received. Hadrian dismounted and immediately came to help Isabeau down from her horse. The gesture was both courteous and significant. By attending to her personally rather than leaving it to a servant, he was making a statement about her importance. She accepted his hand gratefully, her legs slightly shaky after days of riding. A distinguished man in his 50s stepped forward, his clothing rich but understated, his expression carefully neutral. This Isabeau guest must be Lord Ravenscroft, the chief counselor Hadrian had mentioned. He bowed deeply to the king, then turned his attention to Isabeau with assessing eyes. Your Majesty, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. Welcome home. We have been eagerly awaiting your return. His gaze shifted to Isabeau, and she saw surprise flicker in his eyes before he mastered his expression. And welcome to you as well, my lady. The king sent word ahead of your impending nuptials. The court is, naturally, most curious to meet the woman who has captured our sovereign's heart. There was no overt hostility in his words, but Isabeau detected a note of reservation, of judgment being withheld pending further observation. She met his gaze steadily and inclined her head with what she hoped was appropriate dignity. Lord Ravenscroft, I presume, she said, keeping her voice calm and clear. His Majesty has spoken highly of you. I look forward to learning from your wisdom and experience as I adapt to my new role. It was the right thing to say, Isabeau saw immediately. Ravenscroft's expression warmed slightly, and he bowed to her with perhaps a touch more respect than he had initially shown. You are most gracious, my lady. I stand ready to serve both you and His Majesty, in whatever capacity you require. Hadrian placed a hand at the small of Isabeau's back, a gesture of both support and possession. Lord Ravenscroft will show you to your chambers while I attend to some pressing matters of state. I've arranged for apartments in the Queen's wing to be prepared for you. They're adjacent to my own rooms, so we'll be close. Thank you, Isabeau said, though the thought of being separated from him, even briefly, made her anxious. Still, she understood that he had responsibilities that couldn't be ignored, even for her. As Hadrian strode away with several advisors trailing after him, Isabeau found herself surrounded by curious courtiers. Lord Ravenscroft efficiently dispersed most of them, but a few remained, women in elaborate gowns of silk and velvet, their hair arranged in complex styles and adorned with jewels. Isabeau was suddenly intensely aware of her simple wool dress and wind-blown hair. One woman in particular caught Isabeau's attention. She was perhaps 40 years of age, still beautiful, with silver threading through her dark blonde hair and keen blue eyes that assessed Isabeau with undisguised calculation. Her gown was a rich purple, embroidered with gold thread, and she wore a fortune in jewels around her neck and wrists. This, Isabeau realized with sinking certainty, must be Lady Beatrice of Northumberland. "So," Lady Beatrice said, her voice cultured and cool, "you are the village healer who has so enchanted our king. How unexpected." The word dripped with condescension. Isabeau felt a flash of anger but controlled it. She had known there would be opposition, and losing her temper at the first challenge would only prove her critics right about her unsuitability. "Lady Beatrice, I presume," she said evenly. "His Majesty mentioned you. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance." "I'm sure it is," Beatrice replied with a tight smile. "I wonder, though, how a woman of your limited background expects to navigate the complexities of court life. There are protocols, you understand, centuries of tradition and proper behavior. One false step could cause tremendous embarrassment, both to yourself and to His Majesty." "Then I shall endeavor not to make any false steps," Isabeau said calmly. "And I hope I can count on the wisdom and guidance of experienced ladies such as yourself to help me avoid any missteps." It was a diplomatic response that managed to acknowledge Beatrice's status while not conceding any ground. Isabeau saw Lord Ravenscroft's lips twitch with what might have been approval, and several of the other women exchanged glances that suggested they were reassessing their initial judgments. Beatrice's smile grew even tighter. "Of course, we are all eager to assist our future queen in any way we can." The title sounded almost mocking coming from her lips, but Isabeau chose to take the words at face value. "Your kindness is appreciated," Isabeau said. Then, turning to Lord Ravenscroft, "Perhaps you could show me to my chambers now. I confess the journey has left me rather weary, and I would appreciate the opportunity to refresh myself." "Of course, my lady," Ravenscroft said, offering his arm. "This way, if you please." As they walked through the palace corridors, Isabeau was overwhelmed by the opulence surrounding her. Tapestries covered the walls, depicting scenes of battles and hunts and courtly life. The floors were polished stone, and servants scurried about their duties, all of them stopping to bow or curtsy as she passed. It was a far cry from her simple cottage in Thornwick. "You handled Lady Beatrice well," Ravenscroft observed quietly as they climbed a sweeping staircase. "She was testing you, trying to rattle you and make you show weakness. Many women in your position would have either cowered or responded with anger. You did neither. I've dealt with difficult people before," Isabeau said. "Village politics may operate on a smaller scale, but human nature is the same everywhere. Lady Beatrice wants to establish dominance and make me doubt myself. I won't give her that satisfaction." Ravenscroft's expression showed genuine respect now. "His Majesty chose more wisely than I initially credited. You have steel in your spine, Lady Isabeau. You'll need it in the days ahead." They reached a set of ornately carved doors, which Ravenscroft pushed open to reveal a suite of rooms that took Isabeau's breath away. The main chamber was larger than her entire cottage had been, with high ceilings, massive windows that let in floods of light, and furniture that was both beautiful and clearly expensive. Adjoining rooms held a bedchamber with a bed large enough for 4 people, a private bathing room with an actual tub, and a dressing room already partially filled with gowns in various colors. "These were the late Queen's chambers," Ravenscroft explained. "His Majesty's mother. They've been closed since her death 5 years ago, but he ordered them opened and prepared for you. The gowns are newly made, commissioned based on the measurements His Majesty provided. I hope they fit reasonably well." Isabeau moved through the rooms in a daze, touching the fine fabrics of the gowns, running her fingers over the carved wood of the furniture, staring out the windows at the view of the city below. It was all so much more than she had imagined, so far beyond anything she had ever experienced. "There will be ladies assigned to attend you," Ravencroft continued. They should arrive shortly to help you prepare for dinner tonight. His Majesty has arranged a private meal in his chambers, just the two of you. Tomorrow there will be a formal presentation to the court, where the betrothal will be officially announced. Isabeau turned from the window, anxiety tightening her chest. Lord Ravencroft, may I speak frankly with you? Of course, my lady. I'm terrified, Isabeau admitted. I know Hadrian, His Majesty, believes I can do this, and I want to believe it too. But I'm just a village healer. I don't know how to be a queen. I don't know the proper protocols or how to navigate court politics. What if I fail? What if I embarrass him or damage the crown through my ignorance? Ravencroft studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed his austere features. My lady, do you know what the most common failing of the nobility is? They believe that birth and breeding automatically confer wisdom and capability. They think that being born to privilege means they deserve it and know how to wield it properly. But I've served 3 generations of monarchs, and I can tell you that birth means nothing compared to character. He moved closer, his tone earnest. You ask how to be a queen. There is no one way to do it. Every queen has brought her own strengths and perspectives to the role. His Majesty's mother was known for her charity and compassion. His grandmother was a fierce political strategist. You will find your own way, shaped by your own experiences and abilities. Your background as a healer, your understanding of the common people's struggles, your practical knowledge. These are strengths, not weaknesses. Use them. Isabeau felt tears prick her eyes at his unexpected encouragement. Thank you, she said quietly. That means more than you know. You're welcome, my lady. And please, if you have questions or need guidance, don't hesitate to seek me out. I may be old and set in my ways, but I recognize quality when I see it. You have the potential to be a remarkable queen. Don't let the vipers of the court convince you otherwise. After Ravencroft departed, Isabeau was left alone for only a few moments before there was a knock at the door. 3 young women entered, all dressed in fine but practical gowns, and introduced themselves as her new ladies-in-waiting. Their names were Anne, Catherine, and Mary, and they seemed friendly enough, though clearly curious about the woman who would be their mistress. They helped Isabeau bathe, a luxury she had rarely experienced in Thornwick, where heating enough water for a full bath was a laborious process. The warm water and scented oils helped ease the aches from days of travel, and she emerged feeling more human than she had in days. The ladies then helped her dress for dinner, selecting a gown of deep blue velvet with silver embroidery at the bodice and sleeves. It fit remarkably well, though Anne had to make a few quick adjustments with needle and thread. They arranged Isabeau's hair, brushing out the tangles and styling it in a way that was both elegant and suitable for a private dinner. When Isabeau finally saw her reflection in the polished metal mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked every inch a lady of the court, sophisticated and refined. Yet beneath the fine clothes and elaborate hair, Isabeau could still see herself. The same moss-green eyes, the same determined set to her jaw. The trappings might have changed, but she was still fundamentally herself. A servant arrived to escort her to Hadrian's chambers, and Isabeau followed with butterflies dancing in her stomach. She hadn't seen him since their arrival several hours ago, and she found herself eager to be with him again, to draw strength from his presence. Hadrian's chambers were even more impressive than her own, a vast suite that included not just living spaces, but also a study filled with documents and maps, and a small council room where he could meet with advisors. He was standing by the window when she entered, but he turned immediately at the sound of the door, and his face lit up with such joy that Isabeau's heart swelled. "Isabeau," he breathed, crossing the room in quick strides. "You look absolutely magnificent. How are you? Has everyone been treating you well? Have you been comfortable?" "I'm fine," Isabeau assured him, though she couldn't help the relieved sigh that escaped when he pulled her into his arms. A bit overwhelmed, but fine. "Your Lord Ravencroft has been very kind, and my ladies seem pleasant enough, though I did have a rather frosty encounter with Lady Beatrice." Hadrian's expression darkened. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Isabeau said. "She was testing me, seeing if she could rattle me or make me doubt myself. I didn't give her the satisfaction." "That's my Isabeau," Hadrian said with pride, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I knew you would hold your own. But if she or anyone else becomes truly troublesome, you must tell me. I won't tolerate disrespect toward you." They dined together at a small table set before the fireplace. The meal simple but elegant: roasted pheasant, fresh bread, winter vegetables, and wine that was far superior to anything Isabeau had tasted before. As they ate, Hadrian told her about the matters of state he had been dealing with, and Isabeau found herself offering observations and questions that he seemed to value. "Tomorrow will be challenging," Hadrian warned as the meal drew to a close. "The formal presentation to court is always a spectacle, and with the unusual circumstances of our betrothal, there will be even more scrutiny than normal. But Isabeau, I want you to remember something. You belong there. You have every right to stand beside me, not because of your birth or your connections, but because of who you are as a person. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." "I'll try," Isabeau said, "though I admit the thought of facing the entire court tomorrow is terrifying." Hadrian reached across the table and took her hand. "I have an idea that might help. What if we spend the evening going over some of the key people you'll meet tomorrow? Their names, their positions, their likely attitudes toward our marriage. Knowledge is power, after all, and the more prepared you are, the more confident you'll feel." They spent the next several hours doing exactly that, with Hadrian describing the various nobles and courtiers, their allegiances and rivalries, their strengths and weaknesses. Isabeau listened intently, committing as much as she could to memory. It was like learning about a complicated new patient. Understanding the relationships and dynamics was essential to navigating them successfully. When the cathedral bells rang midnight, Hadrian reluctantly said that Isabeau should return to her own chambers to rest. "I wish you could stay," he admitted, "but we need to observe propriety, at least until the wedding. There are already enough people questioning the appropriateness of our match. We shouldn't give them additional ammunition." Isabeau understood, though she was disappointed. She had grown accustomed to falling asleep in his arms during their journey, and the prospect of sleeping alone in that vast bed felt lonely. Still, she recognized the political necessity. Hadrian walked her to the door of her chambers, kissing her good night with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I love you," he said quietly. "Never doubt that, no matter what happens tomorrow or in the days to come. You are my choice, my heart's desire, and I will spend the rest of my life proving to you and to the kingdom that you are exactly the queen England needs." "I love you too," Isabeau whispered, "and I promise I'll make you proud." The next morning dawned bright and cold, winter sunlight streaming through Isabeau's windows. Her ladies arrived early to begin the elaborate process of preparing her for the formal presentation. The gown they selected was the finest yet, a creation of deep crimson velvet embroidered with gold thread in patterns of roses and vines. Over it went a surcoat of cloth of gold, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that involved braids and jeweled pins. As they worked, Anne chatted cheerfully about court gossip, while Catherine offered practical advice about who to watch out for and who might become allies. Mary remained mostly quiet, but Isabeau noticed that her stitching when adjusting the gown was flawless, and she had an artist's eye for color and arrangement. When Isabeau was finally ready, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. The crimson and gold made her skin glow, and the elaborate hairstyle emphasized the fine bones of her face. She looked regal, she realized with wonder. She looked like someone who belonged beside a king. "You look beautiful, my lady," Anne said with genuine warmth. "The court won't know what hit them." A knock at the door announced Hadrian's arrival. He entered wearing full royal regalia, a tunic of midnight blue embroidered with silver thread, a surcoat bearing the royal arms, and the crown of England resting on his dark hair. He looked every inch the king, powerful and commanding, yet when his eyes found Isabeau, they softened with unmistakable love. "You take my breath away," he said quietly, crossing to take her hands. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Isabeau replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the butterflies rioting in her stomach. "Remember," Hadrian said, squeezing her hands reassuringly, "you are not facing them alone. We do this together, as we will do everything from this day forward." They walked through the palace corridor side by side, and Isabeau could feel the weight of history around her. How many queens had walked these halls before her? How many had faced this same moment of being presented to the court? She drew strength from their invisible presence, from the knowledge that she was joining a long line of women who had stood beside kings and shaped the destiny of England. The great hall was packed with what seemed like hundreds of nobles, all dressed in their finest, all craning to get a glimpse of the woman who had captured their king's heart. The buzz of conversation died as the doors opened and Hadrian entered with Isabeau at his side. The silence was so complete that Isabeau could hear the rustle of her gown and the measured cadence of their footsteps on the stone floor. They walked the length of the hall toward the dais where two thrones sat, one larger, one slightly smaller. Isabeau's heart pounded so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. She kept her head high and her expression serene, channeling every ounce of courage and determination she possessed. These people might judge her, might question her worthiness, but she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cower. Hadrian led her up the steps to the dais, and only when they reached the thrones did he release her hand to turn and face the assembled court. His voice rang out clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "Lords and ladies of England, I have called you here today to witness an announcement of great importance to our kingdom. As you know, the question of the royal succession has weighed heavily on the minds of my counselors and, I confess, on my own mind as well. A king must have a queen, and that queen must be chosen with care, for she will stand beside him in ruling this great nation." Hadrian paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. Isabeau could see various expressions: curiosity, speculation, and in some cases, barely concealed disapproval. "I have given this matter considerable thought," Hadrian continued. "I have reviewed the many proposals put before me, considered the political advantages of various alliances, and consulted with my advisors. But in the end I realized that I was approaching the question from the wrong perspective. I was thinking like a king making a strategic decision, rather than as a man choosing a life partner." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the typical language of royal marriage announcements. Then fate intervened, Hadrian said, and now his voice warmed with unmistakable affection. "During my recent journey to the northern borders, I stopped in a small village called Thornwick. There I met Lady Isabeau Thorne, a healer who serves her community with skill and dedication. In our brief time together, I discovered qualities I had never found in any of the noble ladies proposed to me: genuine kindness, sharp intelligence, courage, and an honesty that was as refreshing as it was rare." He turned to look at Isabeau, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. Lady Isabeau did not seek my attention or favor. She did not calculate how to advance herself or her family. She simply was herself, and in being herself, she showed me what I had been missing. She made me remember that beneath the crown, I am still a man, and that man deserves the chance to marry someone he loves rather than someone politically expedient. Hadrian reached for Isabeau's hand again, drawing her forward to stand beside him. "Therefore, I am pleased to announce my betrothal to Lady Isabeau Thorne. We will be married 4 weeks hence, and she will be crowned Queen of England. I expect that all of you will show her the respect and loyalty due to your future sovereign." The silence that followed was profound. Isabeau could see shock on many faces, calculation on others, and outright hostility on a few. Then Lord Ravenscroft, bless him, stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, may I be the first to offer my congratulations on your betrothal," he said clearly. "Lady Isabeau, welcome to court. I look forward to serving you as faithfully as I have served His Majesty." His endorsement seemed to break the spell. Other nobles began to step forward, offering their congratulations with varying degrees of sincerity. Some seemed genuinely pleased, others merely going through the motions of politeness. Lady Beatrice was among the last to approach, her smile not reaching her cold blue eyes. "Congratulations, Your Majesty, my lady," she said, her tone perfectly courteous but somehow still conveying disapproval. "What a romantic tale. I'm sure we all wish you every happiness." "Thank you, Lady Beatrice," Isabeau said evenly. "Your good wishes are appreciated." The formal presentation continued for what felt like hours. Isabeau stood beside Hadrian, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, and trying to remember the names and titles of the seemingly endless parade of nobles. Her feet ached in the elaborate slippers, and her face hurt from maintaining a pleasant expression, but she refused to show any weakness. Finally, mercifully, the ordeal ended. Hadrian dismissed the court, and they were able to retire to his private study. The moment the door closed behind them, Isabeau felt her knees go weak with relief. Hadrian caught her, guiding her to a chair and pressing a cup of wine into her hands. "You were magnificent," he said, kneeling beside her chair. "Isabeau, you handled that beautifully. I was so proud of you." I thought I was going to faint, Isabeau admitted, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped the wine. There were so many people, all staring, all judging, and Lady Beatrice looked like she wanted to run me through with a sword. Beatrice can go hang, Hadrian said bluntly. She has no power over you, Isabeau. Yes, she's influential, and yes, she'll probably cause trouble. But she can't change the fact that you are going to be my wife and England's queen. That decision is made, and I will not be swayed from it. Over the following weeks, Isabeau threw herself into learning everything she could about her new role. Lord Ravenscroft arranged for tutors to instruct her in protocol, history, and statecraft. She spent hours each day studying, determined to prove that she could be more than just the king's beloved. She could be a competent, capable queen. Her ladies proved invaluable during this time. Anne's cheerful gossip actually contained useful information about court dynamics. Catherine's practical advice helped Isabeau navigate tricky social situations, and Mary's quiet observations often pointed out things the others missed. Not everyone was hostile. Isabeau found unexpected allies among some of the younger nobles and, surprisingly, among the servants. The common-born staff appreciated having someone who understood their lives and challenges in a position of power. They became her eyes and ears, reporting things that the nobles thought beneath their notice, but which Isabeau recognized as important. She also made a point of continuing her healing work, setting aside time each week to treat servants and common people who came to the palace seeking help. Some courtiers thought this beneath her dignity, but Isabeau didn't care. It kept her connected to her roots and reminded her why Hadrian had chosen her in the first place. The king himself was her constant support. Despite his heavy responsibilities, he made time for her every day, helping her prepare for her new role while also ensuring that their relationship didn't get lost in the formality and politics. They took walks in the palace gardens, dined together privately, and talked for hours about everything from philosophy to the practical challenges of governance. "You're blossoming," Hadrian observed one evening as they sat together in his study, Isabeau reviewing documents while he worked on correspondence. "When you first arrived, you were like a flower that had been kept in shadow. Now you're finally getting the sunlight you need, and you're thriving." Isabeau looked up from her reading, smiling at him. "I had good soil to grow in," she said. "Your support, Lord Ravenscroft's guidance, even the challenges from people like Lady Beatrice, they've all helped me become stronger." "Have I told you today that I love you?" Hadrian asked, setting aside his quill. "Not in the last hour," Isabeau teased. Hadrian rose and came to her, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Then I'm remiss in my duties. I love you, Isabeau Thorne, soon to be Isabeau Thornwood. I love your strength, your compassion, your brilliant mind, and your courageous heart. I love the way you've faced every challenge thrown at you and emerged victorious. I love that you've never tried to be anyone other than yourself. I love you too," Isabeau whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." The wedding day arrived with unseasonably warm weather for winter, as if even nature wanted to bless their union. Isabeau woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. Her ladies arrived early to begin the elaborate process of preparing her for the ceremony. The wedding gown was a masterpiece, white silk embroidered with silver thread and seed pearls, with a train so long it would require 2 attendants to carry it. Over it went a mantle of crimson velvet lined with ermine, fastened at the shoulder with a brooch of gold and rubies. Her hair was left loose, as was traditional for royal brides, but crowned with a delicate circlet of silver, set with diamonds. As Mary fastened the last clasp and Anne arranged the train, Catherine produced a small package. "This arrived for you this morning, my lady, from Thornwick." Isabeau opened it with shaking hands and found a carefully wrapped bundle. Inside was a handkerchief embroidered by Marjorie, featuring Isabeau's initials intertwined with Hadrian's, and a note in her friend's familiar hand. "My dearest Belle," it read, "I wish I could be there to see you wed your king, but I know you understand why I cannot make the journey. Please know that all of Thornwick is celebrating with you today. You have brought honor to our village and hope to all of us who thought our births would determine our destinies forever. Be happy, my friend. Be gloriously, wonderfully happy. With all my love, Marjorie." Tears threatened to spill, but Isabeau blinked them back. She couldn't ruin the elaborate cosmetics Anne had so carefully applied. Instead, she tucked the handkerchief into her sleeve. a tangible connection to her old life and the friend who had always believed in her. The ceremony took place in the great cathedral, witnessed by what seemed like half of England. The building was packed with nobles, church officials, foreign dignitaries, and common people who had been allowed to fill the back pews and gallery. Isabeau walked down the endless aisle on Lord Ravenscroft's arm. Hadrian had asked him to give her away, since she had no family of her own, and the old counselor had accepted the honor with tears in his eyes. Hadrian stood at the altar in magnificent robes of state, the crown on his head catching the light streaming through the stained glass windows. But when Isabeau's eyes met his, she saw not the king, but the man she loved, and all her nervousness melted away. This was right. This was meant to be. The Archbishop of Canterbury performed the ceremony, his voice resonant with authority as he spoke the ancient words that would bind them together. Isabeau and Hadrian made their vows clearly and without hesitation, their voices steady and sure. When Hadrian slipped the ring onto her finger, a band of gold set with emeralds the exact color of her eyes, Isabeau felt something click into place deep in her soul. This was her future, her destiny, and she embraced it fully. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Archbishop declared. "Your Majesties, you may seal your union with a kiss." Hadrian cupped Isabeau's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to many eyes in the congregation. It was a kiss that spoke of love and promise, of two people choosing each other against all odds and all opposition. When they turned to face the congregation as king and queen, the cheers that erupted were deafening. Not everyone in that cathedral approved of their marriage, Isabeau knew, but in that moment, it didn't matter. She had Hadrian's love, she had her own determination and strength, and she had the opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of the people she now served. The coronation that followed was equally magnificent. Isabeau knelt before the Archbishop, and he placed the smaller crown, the Queen's crown of England, upon her head. The weight of it was considerable, both physically and symbolically, but Isabeau bore it gladly. She was no longer Isabeau Thorne, village healer. She was Queen Isabeau, and she would prove herself worthy of the title. The celebrations that followed lasted for days. There were feasts and tournaments, music and dancing, and endless streams of well-wishers. Through it all, Isabeau maintained her grace and dignity, winning over even some of her harshest critics with her genuine kindness and quick intelligence. Lady Beatrice, seeing which way the wind was blowing, made a strategic retreat and became, if not friendly, at least neutrally polite. Others who had opposed the marriage grudgingly admitted that the new queen was not the disaster they had predicted. Some even began to see advantages in having a queen who understood the common people and could bridge the gap between the nobility and their subjects. As the weeks turned into months, Isabeau settled into her role with increasing confidence. She established programs to improve medical care for the poor, drawing on her own knowledge and experience. She worked with Hadrian to make the court more accessible to ordinary people, creating opportunities for those of merit to advance regardless of birth. And she became pregnant, ensuring the succession and silencing those who had questioned whether a common-born woman could produce royal heirs. Through all of it, her relationship with Hadrian remained the foundation of everything else. They were partners in the truest sense, supporting each other, challenging each other, and loving each other with a depth and intensity that only grew stronger with time. One evening, nearly a year after their wedding, Isabeau stood at the window of the royal chambers, her hand resting on her swelling belly, watching the sun set over the capital. Hadrian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how much has changed since that day in Thornwick when I kissed a stranger to make Edmund jealous," Isabeau said with a smile. "I was so foolish, so impulsive, and yet that moment of recklessness led to this, to us, to our child, to a life I never could have imagined. I'm grateful for your recklessness," Hadrian said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That impulsive kiss was the beginning of everything good in my life. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I thought myself incapable of it, and a future worth living for. We gave those things to each other," Isabeau corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "You showed me that I was worth more than I believed, that my dreams could be bigger than the small world I knew. You gave me the courage to reach for something extraordinary. And do you have any regrets?" Hadrian asked, though his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. "Any moments when you wish you were back in your cottage in Thornwick, living a simple, quiet life?" Isabeau pretended to consider the question seriously. Well, the cottage was warmer in winter, she said, her eyes twinkling, and I didn't have to worry about Lady Beatrice criticizing my choice of gowns. Hadrian laughed and pulled her closer. Is that all? That's all, Isabeau confirmed. No, my love, I have no regrets. This life has challenges I never expected, and sometimes I miss the simplicity of my old existence. But I wouldn't trade what we have for anything. You are my home now, wherever we are, whatever we face. As you are mine, Hadrian said, and kissed her as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. My impulsive queen, my love, my heart. Thank you for that kiss in the village square. Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing me back, Isabeau whispered against his lips. Thank you for seeing past what I was and believing in what I could become. Thank you for loving me. They stood together as darkness fell over the kingdom. Two people from vastly different worlds who had found in each other everything they needed. The village woman who had kissed a stranger had become a beloved queen. The lonely king who had traveled incognito had found a partner worthy of his crown and his heart. And together they would rule England with wisdom, compassion, and a love that would endure through all the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. In Thornwick, Marjorie smiled as she heard the latest news from court. The queen was expecting her first child, and the king was said to be beside himself with joy and anxiety. She thought of her friend Belle, once the village healer, now the most powerful woman in England, and her heart swelled with pride and happiness. And in the palace, as Isabeau and Hadrian held each other close, their unborn child stirring between them, they knew with absolute certainty that the impulsive kiss that had started it all had been no accident. It had been fate, destiny, the universe conspiring to bring two souls together who were meant to find each other. What had begun as a moment of reckless spite had transformed into a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the most extraordinary things come from the most unexpected places. Their story would be told and retold for generations. The tale of the village woman who kissed a king and won his heart, the king who chose love over political advantage, and the marriage that proved that true partnership transcends all boundaries of birth and status. It was a story of courage, determination, and the transformative power of genuine love. And most importantly, it was a story that ended not with heartbreak or sacrifice, but with joy, fulfillment, and the promise of a future built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and a love that would last a lifetime.